Section 33 of Psychological Examining in the United States Army by Robert Mearns Yerkes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Harvey. Chapter 9. Literacy. Information on illiteracy in the drafted army was obtained only incidentally as it was indicated by the type of examination given recruits. The better examination was developed primarily for men who could not read and write English, and was used for these men in place of the alpha examination, which presupposes English literacy. The percentages of men taking the beta examination are available, but unfortunately the method of segregation of beta in different camps and at different times differed greatly, so that no positive definition of illiteracy can be laid down on this basis. Without a definition, statistics of illiteracy are meaningless, for men vary by all degrees from inability to sign their names or to read even digits up to degrees of ability that would be classed as literate by anyone. In general, it may be said that many of the camps aimed at ability to read and understand newspapers and write letters home, as a basis for the alpha examination, and that the figures for the numbers of men taking beta do approximately reflect this level of literacy. Unfortunately, however, the degree of adequacy with which the intended separation was made depended upon chance conditions, such as the skill of a surgeon who segregated the men, the presence of an interpreter, the time available for segregation, or even perhaps the immediate availability of space in the beta examination room. Camp conditions were rough and examining procedure was constantly being adapted to meet the ever-present emergency. The figures for men taking beta given in this chapter are rather the figures of the less literate in the drafted army than for the illiterate in any strictly defined sense of the term. Notwithstanding these limitations, the extent of illiteracy among the drafted men is a striking fact. The figures for beta are now an exact measure of this fact, and it is equally obvious that without a more definite measure of literacy and a uniform standard for the segregation of groups, detailed statements are impossible. Nevertheless, these measures, though rough and varied, do indicate conditions of serious public concern. The weekly statistical reports to the Surgeon General's office from the camps give the numbers of men taking the beta examination. The usual basis of separation for beta was ability to read and understand newspapers and write letters home. In a number of camps, however, an educational qualification, 4, 5, or 6 years schooling, was added, and in a few camps an educational qualification alone was used. Table 279 indicates the 28 stations at which extensive examination was carried out, both the basis on which a man was considered literate and the number and percent of all men examined whom it was found necessary to send to the beta examination for illiterates. The extent of illiteracy is often largely dependent on the proportion of Negroes in the group. This is therefore indicated in the final column. The figures cover the period from April 27, 1918 to the close of examining. Table 279 is displayed on the page. A number of special reports from camps give comparative data of various sorts, although an absolute definition of literacy is still lacking. The results within a single camp give more valid comparisons than data including several camps. The following table from Camp Devens show for New England and for each New England state the percent of the draft who were given beta. Figures are given for the native-born foreign and Negro groups separately. These percents are not comparable with those in Table 279, for they include, besides the men originally sent to examination beta, also those who failed in the alpha examination for illiterates and were subsequently given examination beta. A table is displayed. A general statement from Camp Jackson gives the percentages of men given examination beta for Northern white, Southern white, foreign-born, and Negro recruits. Northern recruits 7.9, Southern recruits 36.5, foreign-born 58.3, Negro 83.0. Camp Grant reports that, including those who failed on examination alpha, 44% of Northern Negroes and 72% of Southern Negroes were given examination beta. Of the latter group, 30% had already been eliminated by the physical examiners. A special report on the Negroes examined at Camp Upton shows the following percents originally segregated as unable to take the alpha examination for literates. New York City 18.9, New York, outside New York City 25.3, New Jersey 27.5, Delaware 38.5, Virginia 52.4. In view of the importance of problems of Americanization, the following table comparing the English acquirements of men from different European countries is of particular interest. For some countries, the number of cases is small and the figures somewhat unreliable, but the larger differences between nationalities appear consistently at various camps. Figures are percentages of men given beta only. A table is displayed on the page. A special report from Camp Upton gives more detailed data on 2,338 cases from the New York City draft. The following definitions were laid down for the classes listed in the table below. Literate fair, men given examination alpha because stating an ability to read American newspaper. Literate poor, men less literate than the above, but who can write their age, name, hometown, and occupation without help, even though with misspellings, i.e., the men who were given examination beta but who were able to fill in the information at the top of the examination form without help from the orderlies. Literate English, men who cannot fill out the information on the beta examination blank, but who can furnish the information to the orderly by question and answer in English. Illiterate, non-English, men who cannot furnish the required information for the beta examination blank except by aid of an interpreter. Low-grade feeble-minded, men recommended for discharge from the Army on the ground of mental deficiency, in general men with a mental age of less than 9 years. A table is displayed on the page. The following brief report from Camp Wadsworth was requested by the camp personnel adjutant in order to furnish information for the Commission on Illiteracy of South Carolina. For the practical purpose of giving one kind of psychological examination to those who can read and write English, and of giving another kind of psychological examination to those who are unable to read and write English, illiteracy is defined as follows. All men who cannot read and write their own letters, who cannot read English newspapers, or who have only been 1 or 2 years in American public schools as illiterate. This illiteracy may be due to foreign parentage, lack of education, or inferior intelligence. The percentage of illiteracy for various localities represented in recent draft examinations is as follows. A table is displayed on the page. The above figures are most significant in light of the fact that the drafted men from New York State include many foreigners. In spite of that fact, the percentage of illiteracy, 16.6%, seems to be very small when compared with the percentage of illiteracy found among the men reporting from South Carolina. In fact, the percentage for the latter group was found to be so high as to make us doubt the accuracy of the data. A check was therefore made as follows. The records of all South Carolina men in one company were analyzed, with the result that of the 177 men in the company, 109 or 61.6% were illiterate. It seems from this check that the percentage of illiteracy, 49.5%, for the whole group from South Carolina is probably correct. Such a percentage of illiteracy as is found among the men from South Carolina is startling. Among Virginia Negroes reporting at Camp Lee, Virginia, in the fall of 1917, the percentage of illiteracy was 40%. The conclusion is that the problem of illiteracy among South Carolina drafted men is a most serious one. End of section 33. Section 34 of Psychological Examining in the United States Army by Robert Mearns Yerkes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, recorded by Harvey. Chapter 10. Statistics on Education and its Relations to Intelligence Examinations. Section 1. The Schooling of the Army. The principal hollow-rift samples of a number of groups in the Army of the United States have been analyzed in various ways in order to learn the degree of schooling attained by men in the Army and to discover as far as possible any dependence of schooling on intelligence or of intelligence scores on schooling. Records for each group were sorted according to the numbers of years, or grade, of schooling reported and then by intelligence scores, giving 22 hollow-rift tables. The resulting tables, numbers 280 to 301, are presented herewith. 6 projected tables do not appear because the cases in each were too few. On the following pages, tables 280 to 301 are displayed. From these 22 fundamental tables are derived all others in this chapter, except such as are designated as coming from special camp reports. Our first interest is to know what were the actual conditions found in regard to the schooling of the Army. How many years has an officer been to school? How many years has a recruit been to school? What percent graduate from 8th grade, enter high school, enter college, graduate? What can we readily infer about elimination from school in this country? Study of tables 302 to 325 and figures 24 to 49 will answer many of these questions concerning officers, native-born and foreign white recruits, and northern and southern Negro recruits. On the following page, table 302 and figure 34 are displayed. Almost one-third of all officers are college graduates who have gone no further. This is the schooling most frequently reported among the officer group. Practically all officers must have graduated from 8th grade. 1/4 have not gone beyond high school. More than another fourth have begun but not completed a college course. The remainder, about 1/7, have done 1, 2, or more years of graduate work. The distribution, which is negligible below 8 years, with a steep mode at 16 years, see table 302-24, is in striking contrast to that representing the schooling of recruits. Figure 25 is displayed on the page. Of native-born white recruits, 1/4 are 8th grade graduates who have had no further schooling. This is the schooling most frequently reported. More than half have gone no further than the 7th grade. Almost 1/4 had more or less high school training, while only 5.4%, 1/20th, have entered college, and only 1.25% have been graduated. The white draft of foreign births is less scored. More than half of this group have not gone beyond the 5th grade, while 1/8 or 12.5% report no schooling. Negro recruits, though brought up in this country, where elementary education is supposedly not only free but compulsory in all, report no schooling in astonishingly large proportion, 19% in the southern, 7% in the northern states. More than half the Negroes from the southern states had not gone beyond the 3rd grade, and only 7% finished the 8th. In northern states, half do not go beyond the 5th grade, and about 1/4 finish the 8th. The median schooling for each group is as follows. Table 302 and figures 25, 26, and 27 present further analysis of the educational achievements of officers. Officers make a fairly homogeneous group, yet distinct differences appear when each arm of the service is separately plotted. It is not surprising, in view of the requirements of the medical profession, that the medical corps has in general longer education than any other. This is, however, surprising when it is remembered that all branches outside the medical department make better records on the intelligence examinations than does the medical corps. See Part 2, Chapter 14. The contrast with the Quartermaster Corps, which makes a very similar intelligence record, but is much less scored, is especially interesting in considering to what extent examination alpha is dependent on schooling. The Dental and Veterinary Corps also stand high relative to other officers as to schooling, and low as to intelligence rating. That the most frequent schooling among dentists and especially among veterinarians is 3-year college is doubtless explained by the fact that many dental colleges and most veterinary colleges normally offer a 3-year course. See also Table 303. On the following page, Table 303, Figure 26 and Figure 27 are displayed. Later study of medical records has shown that the scattering cases where officers reported, for instance, 4 or 7 years schooling, etc., were usually actually 4 years college, 7 years college, etc. This lower tail of the distribution may therefore best be disregarded as an artifact due to the method by which the data were collected. The light thrown by these tables on the extent of examination in our public school systems will doubtless attract attention in school circles. The facts reported by white recruits may be stated in this form. Of 100 white recruits who entered the 1st grade in this country, 95 remained in school till grade 2, 92 till grade 3, 87 till grade 4, 79 till grade 5, 70 till grade 6, 59 till grade 7, and 45 till grade 8. 21 of them entered high school, 16 kept on till the 2nd year, 11 till the 3rd, and 9 of the 100 graduated from high school. 5 of these entered college, and 1 graduated from college. See Table 304, Figure 28. It is to be remembered that this includes the foreign-born but not the Negro draft, and does not include officers. Figures for the native-born white draft are given in Table 304, which also gives previous estimates of elimination from school. It is interesting to see how closely some of these have approached the figures actually reported by the draft. Figure 28 is displayed on the following page, and Table 304 is displayed. Section 2. The Intelligence of the Army. Before going into the relation of education to the Army intelligence examinations, it will be well to present briefly the performance on these examinations of each entire group, regardless of schooling. The differences between these groups, it will be seen, roughly correspond to the schooling differences previously presented, and to such an extent as to force recognition of a common factor. Tables 305 and 306 in figures 29 and 30 show respectively the distributions of alpha and of beta scores for officers. Note beta, native-born and foreign white draft, and northern and southern Negro groups. Tables 305 and 306 are displayed on the following page. Examination beta, it will be remembered, was given to men unable to read and write readily in English, or who had not reached a given school grade, usually 4, 5, or 6. The proportion of men given beta was naturally very different amongst southern Negroes. For instance, from what it was among native-born white recruits, the graphs showing distributions on alpha and beta are on a percent basis and appear the same size, but the proportions of each group which went to alpha and to beta are shown in Table 307. Table 307 is displayed on the page. When these intelligence distributions are compared with the schooling distributions just shown for the same groups, the following observation may be made. The better educated the group, the better its record on the intelligence examinations. Or equally truly, the better the intelligence rating a group can make, the more education it has obtained. The only point at which the correspondence fails is that the Northern Negro draft group is better scored, though less intelligent, than the foreign draft group. It is just in line with the discrepancy too, that the Southern Negro group, lowest in each comparison, is nevertheless much farther removed from the others in intelligence rating than it is in schooling. Figure 29 and 30 are displayed on the previous page. The normal relation between the intelligence of a race and its interest in the training of its youth, one might say, has been upset by contact with a highly educated civilization, which has enormously increased the time the Negro spends on education without correspondingly increasing his intelligence as measured by these examinations. The position of army officers in the two comparisons also falls in line here. In each respect it holds the highest position, but is much farther separated from the other groups in schooling than it is in intelligence. This greatly increased education, in other words, is not accompanied by an equal increase in the intelligence rating. In the latter, the distributions for officers and white drafts still overlap appreciably, while schooling separates them quite sharply. The alpha and beta median scores for these groups appear at the foot of the corresponding distribution tables. Section 3. Intelligence as independent of schooling. With the entire groups described in the previous paragraphs, officers native-born and foreign white draft, and northern and southern Negro draft are broken up into subgroups according to schooling, a series of interesting comparisons becomes evident. The schooling groups used are 0 to 4 years, 5 to 8 years, high school 1 to 4 years, college 1 to 4 years, the graduate 1 or more years. See tables 308 to 316, figures 31 and 39. Statements previously made regarding the proportion in which each group had to take examination beta should be called to mind in this connection. Again, it is obvious that schooling and intelligence are related within each group. Subgroups which are successfully better schooled make successfully better showing in intelligence examinations. Table 308 is displayed on the page, and figure 31 is displayed on the following page. Tables 309 and 310 are displayed on the following page. Figure 32 and 33, table 311 to 312, figures 34 and 35, and tables 313 to 315, figures 36 to 37, table 316, and figure 38 and 39 are displayed. The differences in intelligence between subgroups of different schooling are greatest in the native-born white draft, where the range of intelligence is widest. They are least in the officer and southern Negro draft groups, where the range of intelligence is least. Officers are already highly selected on a basis in which intelligence plays an important part, so that even the least schooled group of officers is highly intelligent, while even the best educated southern Negroes are of relatively low intelligence. Tables 317 and 323 and figures 40 to 49 make comparisons between subgroups equally scored, taken from our original groups: officers, native-born and foreign white draft, and northern and southern Negroes. The schooling groups used in this case were the 4th grade, 8th grade, 4th year high school, and 4th year college groups. In tables 317 and 318 and figures 40 and 41 appear all the recruits who reported that they stopped school at grade 4. The grade standards, of course, are not identical all over the country, especially as between schools for whites and for Negro children, so that 4th grade schooling doubtless varies in meaning from group to group. But this variability certainly cannot account for the clear intelligence differences between groups. In the alpha curves for grade 4, the most interesting feature is that the foreign appears better than the native-born draft, though the difference is not great. This relation is easy to understand when it is considered that there may be greater pressure to continue in school in native than in foreign communities in this country, and sometimes better school opportunities. Native-born children who drop out at this age are likely to do so because of low intelligence, whereas the foreign-born children may more often leave for other reasons. The part of the two groups who took examination beta make very similar scores. The extremely poor showing in the Southern Negro is only the more striking when it is recalled that the 4th grade group has more than the average schooling for Southern Negroes. Tables 317 to 320 and figures 40 to 43 are displayed on the following pages. When a comparison is made between the corresponding groups of 8th grade schooling, see tables 319, 320, figures 42 and 43, similar results appear. The foreign-born group at this schooling level no longer surpasses the native-born group, but is not very different from it. The group of officers is sharply separated from the groups of recruits. When groups of high school and of college education are considered, see tables 321 and 322, figures 44 and 45, the beta groups are very small indeed and may be disregarded. Officers and recruits at this schooling level are less different in intelligence, but the foreign-born group of recruits is more different from the native-born at the lower levels. Numbers of recruits who are college graduates, except the native-born white group, are too small to be significant. The native-born white recruits at this schooling level, however, do just as well on examination alpha as do officers. This interesting shift is shown more clearly in figures 46 to 48, in which the alpha curves for these two groups are isolated. It may be that the intelligence necessary to graduate from college is requisite in an officer, but that college graduates who, for one reason or another, find themselves in the ranks are practically no less intelligent than those who become officers. Figures 44 to 47 are displayed on the following pages. Tables 321 to 323 are displayed on the following pages. That education is certainly not the chief conditioning factor in scores on examination alpha is very well shown in table 323 and figure 49. Here the alpha scores of native-born white recruits of high school and college education are compared with those of officers of 8th grade schooling or less. Every recruit in the recruit group has had more schooling than any officer in the officer group. The least educated recruit in the group has had a longer education than the best educated officer included. And the group of officers nevertheless makes a slightly better record on examination alpha. It is evident then that the examination is measuring other qualities in which officers stand above recruits to a greater extent than it is measuring education. Section 4. Correlations between schooling and intelligence rating. In view of the close relationship between education and intelligence ratings, which have appeared in the preceding sections, it is not surprising that the computed coefficients of correlation, Pearson R, run high. In general, it may be said of examination alpha that in an unselected group, i.e., including those men who would ordinarily be considered too illiterate to take alpha, the correlation with the number of years schooling reported approximates positive 0.75. In an alpha group, i.e., excluding illiterates, the correlation coefficient approximates positive 0.65. If alpha were to be given to an unselected group, the dispersion of whose scores covered the whole range of the examination and whose reported schooling varied from none at all to 7 years or more of college work, the correlation coefficient would doubtless be greater than any here presented. The nearest approach to this is a combination of two of the groups which appear in table 324, the Hancock group of 489 and the unselected group from 9 camps, group 10. This gives a wide range both of schooling and of alpha scores and a correlation coefficient of positive 0.81 between reported schooling and alpha-weighted total. Except for the principal holder of sample, groups 1, 2, and 3, table 324 is compiled from camp reports and from data already at hand before the principal holder of samples were made. The most heterogeneous single group included the unselected group of 653 men from 9 camps, group 10, contains no weighted alpha score higher than 360, and no schooling record of more than 4 years college, thus not covering the upper part of the range in either respect. For this group, the correlation is 0.75, whether raw or weighted totals are considered. The same relation is found for the unselected group from the 304th Ammunition Train, Camp Meade, in which the range of scores and schooling is about the same as for the unselected group of 653. Table 324 is displayed on the page. The term alpha group in this table indicates, as has been said, that the men considered too illiterate to take alpha had already been eliminated. Cody bases 4th grade school, Hancock bases ability to read and write fairly or 6th grade schooling, from the Meade group termed unselected. No elimination at all has been made. From the unselected group of 653 men of foreign birth had been eliminated. It is obvious in looking over these correlations that they vary chiefly with the heterogeneity of the group, the range both of schooling and of alpha scores which is involved. It is for this reason that the coefficient for officer groups is always small. The correlation plots of the Holler's samplings appear in tables 281 to 287. That of the unselected group of 653 men from 9 camps in table 325, it will be noted that of the men who fall below the average score in examination alpha, raw 60-64, weighted 120 to 129 score groups, very few go to college, less than 1% of those being below average in the white draft groups, i.e. less than 0.5% of the total number, and about 1.5% of those below average, i.e. 0.75% of the total number, in the Negro draft groups. This fact appears clearly in the plot for the unselected group of 653, where only a single individual, dental student, of the 348 men who fall below the average alpha score, has ever been to college. The same is true of that exception of the Hancock group. Moreover, of this 348 who fall below the average alpha score, only 4 were graduated from high school. Only 10 others ever attended high school. The theory that native intelligence is one of the most important conditioning factors in continuance in school is certainly borne out by this accumulation of data. Table 325 is displayed on the page. Correlation of each of the 8 alpha tests with reported schooling has been made in 2 of the groups in Table 326, the combined Hancock alpha group and the unselected English-speaking group of 653, Group 10. The coefficients are as follows. Table 326 is displayed on the page. Inspection of the scatter diagrams shows that the discrepancies between these 2 sets of figures are due chiefly to the inclusion in the unselected group of 653 of a number of illiterate men. The extreme skewness due to the large number of low scores on tests 4, 5, and 7 tends to lower the correlation coefficients on these tests in the unselected group, while on tests 1 and 8, the unusual number of low scores makes the distributions more nearly normal, and thus helps to raise the correlation coefficients. The differences in tests 3 and 6, and especially in test 2, have not been explained. Most correlations of beta in individual examinations with schooling are of an entirely different significance than those of alpha, because the groups are so selected that the schooling is restricted. Schooling, 4, 5, or 6 years, is indeed frequently the sole basis of the separation into the alpha and beta groups. Intelligence scores are low in these groups for the most part, and under these limitations, the correlation coefficient is bound to be low. This relation holds for the correlations of the principal samplings shown in Table 327. These coefficients should be compared with the figures for the unselected group from Camp Meade, includes foreigners, and for Camp 10, excludes foreigners, which conclude the table. The correlation plot for Group 10, beta raw total with years schooling, is shown in Table 328. Table 327 is displayed on the page. A report from Camp Lee on the results of giving examination beta to school children of Petersburg, Vancouver, gives a median scores of Table 329 for each of the beta tests and for the weighted total. Table 328 and Table 329 are displayed on the page. The only one of the individual examinations which schooling correlation has been determined in an unselected group is a Stanford-Binet examination. This determination was made for Group 10, the experimental group of 653 recruits from 9 camps, and the result is shown in Table 330. Table 330 is displayed on the page. Probably the best measure of intelligence which the Army tests have yielded is a combination of the standing on alpha, beta, and individual examinations. This, though not practical for actual use, was computed for the experimental group of 653 men from 9 camps. The schooling reported by this group was plotted against the combined standing with the results shown in Table 331. Table 331 is displayed on the page. It is again evident here that though an intelligent man may drop out of school at almost any stage beyond grade 4, an unintelligent man is most unlikely to remain in school beyond the 8th grade. Distinctly more than average intelligence would seem to be a prerequisite to the college education, and almost as strictly a prerequisite to graduating from or even entering high school. End of section 34. Section 35 of Psychological Examining in the United States Army by Mearns Yerkes. This LibriVox recording is the public domain. Recorded by Harvey. Chapter 11. Intelligence of the Draft in Relation to Fitness for Military Service. Section 1. Intelligence of the Draft. The psychological examiner is frequently asked this question: how intelligent is the Army? There is an inherent difficulty in making an answer, for there are no standards in terms of which the statement can be made. The most familiar measures of intelligence, years of mental age as determined by the Stanford-Binet examination, are the results of investigations of a much smaller group, approximately 1,000 cases, than the group studied in the Army. For norms of adult intelligence, the results of the Army examinations are undoubtedly the most representative. It is customary to say that the mental age of the average adult is about 16 years. This figure is based, however, upon examination of only 62 persons, 32 of them high school pupils from 16 to 20 years of age, and 30 of them businessmen of moderate success and very limited educational advantages. This group is too small to give very reliable results, and is furthermore probably not typical. High school pupils and businessmen of moderate success presumably do not present the average American adult with respect to intelligence. See Chapter 10, Table 330, in which 85% of the men who had been to high school show mental ages above average. It appears that the intelligence of the principal sample of the white draft, when transmuted from alpha to beta examinations into terms of mental age, is about 13 years, 13.08. Here we have a measure of the average intelligence of nearly 100,000 white recruits. We can hardly say, however, with assurance that these recruits are 3 years mental age below the average. Indeed, it might be argued on extrinsic grounds that the draft itself is more representative of the average intelligence of the country than as a group of high school students and businessmen. The draft, it is true, is highly selected at the upper end by reason of the fact that men of higher intelligence became officers without being drafted or constituted the greater part of the group of professional and business experts, and were exempted from draft because essential to industrial activity in the war. It is impossible to guess the extent of this selection with respect to intelligence. It seems quite impossible that it could have reduced the intelligence level of the draft so much as 3 years. Considerably less than 15% of the draft, cf. Table 333, lie above 16 years mental age. This discrepancy would mean that the very large number of men in proportion to the draft, considerably more than 1 man to every 3 of the draft, perhaps even so to a great proportion as 2 to every 3, would have been exempted because of service as an officer or because in some essential industrial occupation. Undoubtedly, the intelligence of the draft is somewhat lower than that of the country at large, although it is quite unlikely that the difference should be so great. It must be recalled further that there was also selection at the lower end of the scale on intelligence. The low-grade feeble-minded were not in general included in the draft. This selection tends to offset the selection at the upper end, although presumably it does not completely counterbalance it, and thus to render the average intelligence of the draft more nearly representative of the population at large than would otherwise be the case. In general, then, we are forced to reply to the question, how intelligent is the Army? By stating arbitrary figures that refer to the draft itself, and by arguing further that the draft is approximately a representative group, which is presumably, however, a little lower in intelligence than is the country at large. On the following pages, figures 50 to 52 are displayed. The intelligence of the draft in terms of the theoretical combined scale derived in Chapter 2 is shown in Table 165. These figures transformed into percentiles are given herewith in Table 332 and graphically in Figure 50. The values of the class intervals of the combined scale have been transmuted into terms of mental age in Table 333 and Figures 51 and 52. This transmutation was made not by the regression equation, but by equating the means of the experimental group in terms of combined scale and of mental age and multiplying deviations from the mean of the combined scale by the ratio of the two standard deviations. These tables and graphs include also, for purposes of comparison, the Negro draft, white officers, and groups of men examined individually. The transmutation into mental age is given because those terms have now acquired some absolute meaning and are therefore familiar. Rejections from the Army, as well as special treatment of the feeble-minded in civil life, can be thought of best in relation to units of mental age. On the other hand, as we have just seen, it may be necessary to revise our notion of the frequency of occurrence of these various levels of intelligence. We know now approximately from clinical experience the capacity and mental ability of a man of 13 years mental age. We have never heretofore supposed that the mental ability of this man was the average of the country or anywhere near it. A moron has been defined as anyone with a mental age from 7 to 12 years. If this definition is interpreted as meaning anyone with a mental age less than 13 years, as has recently been done, then almost half of the white draft, 47.3%, would have been morons. Thus it appears that feeble-mindedness, as at present defined, is of much greater frequency of occurrence than had been originally supposed. Table 332 is displayed on the page, and Table 333 is displayed on the following page. Since the grade of intelligence furnished a basis for rejection, discharge, or assignment to special organizations, such as labor battalions or development battalions, it was necessary in the psychological service to make some practical decision as to the various levels at which recommendation for such disposition should be made. No suggestion could be made until the actual operation of psychological examining in the camps had been established. In the very first period of examining, there was no official rule. Later it was suggested that men whose mental age was less than 10 years could not be utilized to advantage in the Army. At that time the development battalions and labor battalions did not exist, and the only alternative to regular service was discharge. It was soon found, however, that the 10-year standard was too high, less presumably because of the fitness of men just under 10 years mental age for regular service than because of the fact that an impractically large number would have been discharged on this basis, from 10 to 13%. Cf. Table 333. At Camp Devens, 9 years was adopted as a working basis, and later, with the establishment of labor battalions and development battalions, the following rule was laid down. In general, subjects whose mental age is below 8 should be seriously considered for discharge or development battalion. Those whose mental age from 8 to 10 should be considered for use in special service organizations or for assignment to development battalions. The question of different standards for Negroes was raised. Half of the Negro draft was rated by the examination system as below 10 years mental age, Table 333, but never answered. The camps were in general obliged to determine their own procedure in accordance with local conditions. Table 333 and Figure 51 give the best summary of the intelligence of the draft that is available. It will be noted that there are two sets of figures. One is set derived from groups 1, 2, and 3 of the principal sample as laid down on the combined scale, and the other the actual percentage obtained in the standard Binet examinations of the 653 native-born white recruits of Group 10. The former group is large and representative, but involves an error dependent on the fact that these men were examined by alpha and beta and noted by a mental age scale. The second group suffers from the fact that it is small, and it cannot be demonstrated to be representative. If the two distributions are taken together, the results can undoubtedly be considered accurate within the limits of discrepancy between them. It will be seen that a level of 8 years mental age for rejection would mean the elimination of from 0.5% to 2% of white recruits and approximately 17% of Negro recruits. Placing the level at 9 years would eliminate 4 or 5% of the whites and presumably 32% of Negroes. A 10-year limit rejects from 10 to 13% of white and 48% of Negro recruits. It would be totally impossible to exclude all morons, as the term is at present defined, for there are under 13 years, 47% of whites, and 89% of Negroes. Several studies of the groups of men who were individually examined or who were recommended for discharge throw light on the social value of men unable to pass the group examinations. Summaries of two such studies follow in sections 2 and 3. Section 2. Characteristics of men recalled for individual examination. Men who are recalled for individual examination in camp are those who have failed to pass the group examination. They may fail because of defective intelligence or because of some social maladjustment that renders them unable or unwilling to cooperate in the group examination. Although no stricter definition can be laid down, they do in general constitute a low-grade group, a large proportion of which requires special treatment or assignment in the military machine. A qualitative study of such a group is therefore of interest. For this purpose, there are available records of a group of men, both white and colored, who were examined at Camp Sheridan, Alabama, between May and December 1918. These records are unusually complete. Almost 4% of the total number examined at this camp were given the individual test. The corresponding percentage in the whole Army is about 5%. Of 2,181 men examined, such vital facts as disease history and education were recorded for 1,216. This group is separated into the whites and the Negroes. It is further divided according to the disposition recommended by the psychologist on the basis of the result of individual examination as follows: regular service, development battalion, domestic service, discharge, and attention of psychiatrists. Because of the few cases, 15 in all, of white men referred to the psychiatrist, this group will drop out of discussion. Recommendation was usually based entirely on mental age determined. In Table 334 are shown the numbers included in each group. From this table, it will be observed that almost half, 45% of whites, 44.6% of Negroes, were recommended for regular service. The percentage distributions of mental ages in this group are given in Table 335 and in Figure 53. The median mental age of the Negro group is about 1 year less than the median for the white group, 8.6 and 9.6 years. The medians for the total group individually examined at Camp Sheridan are 8.3 years for the Negroes and 9.7 for the whites. This very slight difference shows that the smaller group which is being studied is representative of the total number. It is of interest to note that of men examined individually, 82.9% of the whites and 90.4% of the Negroes have a mental age of 10 years or under. Table 334 is displayed on the page. Figure 53 is displayed on the following page, and Table 335. Tables 336 and 337, giving the mental age according to recommendation, show the rigid way in which mental age was used as a dividing line for the 5 types of recommendation. A study of the disease conditions of these men brings out striking differences, not only between the whites and the Negroes, but between the total draft and this group. Separate figures for the whites and Negroes in the entire draft are not available. The figures for venereal diseases for the first 1,000,000 men are not valid, because in the early operation of the draft, men with these diseases were in many instances rejected by the draft boards. Among the second 1,000,000 men, 5.4% were reported by their camp examiner after their first examination at camp as having a venereal disease. This percent would doubtless come up to 7 after more careful examinations were held. In the Sheridan group of men examined individually, the total number of men with venereal diseases is 70.5% among the Negroes, 18.5% among the whites. Of the Negroes, 33% had both syphilis and gonorrhea, while of the whites only 9.4% had both. Thus, the percentage of venereal disease in the Negro is about 4 times as great as in the whites for men of this class. On the other hand, the percentage of chronic diseases is for the Negro half of what it is for the whites, 17.8% for Negroes and 34.1% for whites. Infectious diseases were reported for 4.8% of Negroes and 14.4% of whites. It is easily seen from these percentages that the number of men free from disease was small. The whites stand ahead with 33% clear, while only 17.3% of the Negroes were clear. Table 336 is displayed on the page. Table 337 is displayed on the following page. Tables 338 and 339, giving the distribution of disease according to the 5 classes of recommendations, show that there is little relation between the disease conditions and the group for which a man was recommended. Attention is attracted to the Negroes in the development battalion, where the largest percent free from disease were placed, as well as the smallest percent with venereal disease. With the whites, the largest percent free from disease fall in the regular service group and the next largest in the development battalion. As with the Negroes, the smallest percent of whites with venereal disease are in the development battalion. Table 338 and 339 are displayed on the page. By dividing the group according to mental age into those with venereal disease and those without, as in the table 340, it can be observed that there is but significant difference in the medians of either the Negroes or the whites. Table 340 is displayed on the page. Table 341, which gives the year's schooling of the total army and of this low-grade group, shows the decided lack of education of such men. 39% of the whites and 59% of the Negroes did not even reach the first grade. The medians of the different recommendations show up in the year's schooling in a definite manner. Table 342. Tables 341 and 342 are displayed on the page. The illiteracy of this group is evident. 75% of the Negroes and 49.2% of the whites could neither read nor write. 20.2% of the Negroes and 40.7% of the whites could both read and write. In a few cases, the men could read and not write, or vice versa. Of the whites recommended for regular service, 36% could neither read nor write. Of the whites recommended for discharge, 73% could neither read nor write. With the Negroes, 64.9% of those in the group recommended for regular service could neither read nor write, while 96.4% of those recommended for discharge could do neither. The weekly salary range of this group of men examined individually runs up to $65 for the whites and $40 for the Negroes, with a median of the whites earning $16.60 and the median of the Negroes $15. It can be observed from Table 343 that 50.2% of the Negroes and 41.8% of the whites had a weekly wage of less than $15. Table 343 is displayed on the page. Over 60% of both whites and Negroes were, as might be expected, farmers, labourers or miners. More than half of these were farmers. The mental ages of the men in these occupations vary only slightly. The median mental ages are given in Table 344. Table 344 is displayed on the page. It is of interest that 69.9% of the whites and 83.4% of the Negroes held only one job during the year previous to their entrance into the army. 18.3% of the whites and 11.9% of the Negroes held two during the year. As many as 15 different jobs were held in the year by the whites, while 7 was the highest number recorded by the Negroes. The most striking facts relating to this group can be summarized up in brief statements. 1. Mental age. The median of the white group has a mental age of 9.6 years. The median of the Negroes has a mental age of 8.6 years. 82.9% of the whites and 90.4% of the Negroes have a mental age of 10 years or under. 2. Disease. 70.5% of the Negroes reported venereal disease. 18.5% of the whites reported venereal disease. The percent for the 2nd million men in the army is 5.4. 33% of the whites reported no disease. 17.3% of the Negroes reported no disease. 3. Education. 39% of the whites had no schooling. 59% of the Negroes had no schooling. The median of the total white draft had 7.7 years schooling. The median of the Sheridan white group had 1.8 years schooling. The median of the total Negro draft had 4.6 years schooling. The median of the Sheridan Negro group had 0.8 years schooling. 49.2% of the whites could neither read nor write. 75% of the Negroes could neither read nor write. 4. Salary. 41.8% of the whites had a weekly wage of less than $15. 50.2% of the Negroes had a weekly wage of less than $15. Section 3. 300 discharge cases from Camp Grant. This study is of the cases of 300 enlisted men who have been returned to civil life because of mental incompetence for military duty through process of rejection on entrance examination or of certificate of discharge for disability. These discharges and rejections were ordered by the authorities at Camp Grant during the period beginning May 1st and ending August 15, 1918. The material is otherwise unselected. The cases studied are those of 159 Negroes, 144 Caucasians, and 1 Mongolian. All the Negroes and 96 of the Caucasians are native-born. For convenience, the single Mongolian has been placed in the group of foreign-born Caucasians. 50% of the 300 subjects examined gave farming as their principal occupation. Of this number, 47 are native-born whites, 100 are Negroes, and 3 are foreign-born whites. The 62, 30.6%, recorded as unskilled laborers are divided as follows: native-born whites 13, Negroes 29, foreign-born whites 20. The remaining 88 are distributed among 30 different occupations. In collecting data concerning incomes, average weekly earnings for the year preceding the date of entrance into the Army were recorded. The results are not to be contrasted with antebellum figures, since the demand for labour, which has been growing rapidly since 1914, has greatly increased the earning power, even in groups as low as the scale as those of our study. An accurate estimate of earnings in the 300 cases examined is impossible due to lack of definite information concerning maintenance values, which fluctuate according to the social, economic, and geographical distribution of the subjects. 56, 18.6%, received no money compensation whatsoever, and 77, 25.6%, received maintenance in addition to a money return. With 2 or 3 exceptions, these subjects were farmers. A few of the whites were homesteaders, and about 1/3 of the Negroes were crop farmers, owners of small farms, renters, or share laborers. The rest were either working for their parents without wages or earning small sums as farm laborers. The maximum weekly cash income for white farmers was $35, one case, and for Negro farmers $20, one case. The average weekly money return for 64% of the white farmers who received a money wage was $13, while for the 52% of Negro farmers earning $5 or more per week, the average return was $10. Most of these received maintenance in addition to cash. 36% of the white farmers and 33% of the Negro farmers received maintenance only. For the 300 cases, the average weekly earning power of those receiving a cash compensation exclusive for maintenance was, for 76 native-born whites, $14,804. For 124 Negroes, $10,935. For 43 foreign-born whites, $18,302. Average for 300, $13,426. The largest single wage recorded is $70 per week. This amount was earned by a white man engaged in the construction of steel ships and probably includes pay for overtime. The subject had a mental age of 9 years, 11 months. He was discharged as a constitutional inferior because of obvious mental defect and a long criminal history in civil life and in the Army. 23.3% of the total number reported no disease history. Language difficulties, faulty memories, and ignorance of nomenclature on the part of the subjects account to a degree for this high figure. If recourse could have been had to the testimony of civil physicians and relatives, a considerable decrease doubtless would be shown. Among native-born whites, the diseases showing the higher frequencies are measles 14.75%, pneumonia 14.75%, gastrointestinal troubles 13.11%, gonorrhea 11.47%, and rheumatism 11.47%. Among Negroes, the higher frequencies are gonorrhea 82.86%, syphilis 48.57%, malaria 32.86%, and tropical fever 14.29%. Higher disease frequencies in the group of foreign-born whites are gonorrhea 48.28% and syphilis 13.8%. The figures for venereal diseases are probably too low, particularly in the syphilis item. In the cases of 51 native-born whites, 22 Negroes, and 11 foreign-born whites, psychosis were diagnosed. In many of these instances, psychotic conditions were coupled with feeble-mindedness. 309 clinical examinations furnished the basis for mental age reckonings. The distributions for whites and Negroes separately have been included in Table 333. The average mental ages are as follows: 96 native-born Caucasians, 7 years, 11.5 months. 159 Negroes, 5 years, 6 months. 45 foreign-born Caucasians, 7 years. 300 total group, 6 years, 10 months. 10 native-born whites, 108 Negroes, and 29 foreign-born whites never went to school. 9 native-born whites, 8 Negroes, and 1 foreign-born white attended school for less than 1 year. Of the total group, 147 did not attend school, and 18% spent less than 1 year in a classroom. The average attendance time of subjects having 1 or more years in school is as follows: 77 native-born whites, 6.00 years. 43 Negroes, 3.51 years. 15 foreign-born whites, 5.20 years. 135 total group, 5.12 years. The coefficient of correlation between periods of school attendance and mental ages is 0.54. The second, first, third, and fourth grade show the greatest frequency numbers, having 31, 30, 23, and 23 cases respectively. Of the whole group, 53.3% are illiterate. One individual had completed high school course, and one was a college graduate. The coefficient of correlation between school grades and mental ages, 140 cases, is 0.64. The rural type preponderates in the cases studied. Not only the 150 farmers, but also a great many of those listed as drivers, labourers, railroads, section hands, woodsmen, etc., are of country origin. Almost without exception, the foreign-born subjects were of the lower peasant type, while a very small proportion of the Negroes could be termed urban dwellers. Approximately 32 of the native-born whites were city-born. The natural difficulties attendant upon attempts to obtain sex histories of subjects during a single interview were complicated by language difficulties, low mentality, psychosis, and lack of frankness on the part of many individuals. The data secured is therefore fragmentary. Habitual masturbation was acknowledged by 23 native-born whites, 5 Negroes, and 1 foreign-born white. 11 whites claimed they have never had sexual intercourse, 1 case of infantile sex development, 1 of bestiality, and 2 of chronic enuresis were found. End of section 35. Section 36 of Psychological Examining in the United States Army by Mearns Yerkes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, recorded by Harvey. Chapter 12. Disciplinary Cases. The data for the study of disciplinary cases came from 2 sources. At Camp Dix, an extensive examination was made of 939 whites and 484 Negroes convicted by summary and special court-martial from July to November 1918. Like data was secured for 597 men convicted at Camp Cody and 65 men in the Depot Brigade Stockade at Camp McClellan. Further data were obtained through the study of the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, of some 3,300 records made by the men confined there. Section 1. Level of Intelligence of Disciplinary Cases. In the Depot Brigade at Camp Dix, during the months June and July 1918, there were 479 white offenders. The figures in Table 345, 346, and 347, which show the distributions of the psychological ratings of these men, indicate that 21% of these offenders had an intelligence rating of E. This means that the men were in the lowest decile of the Army, so far as intelligence is concerned. Such a rating means that the psychologist recommends discharge for mental deficiency, assignment to Labour or Development Battalion, or to some duty requiring less than average mentality. Considering the group in relation to what is approximately average intelligence, the C rating, we find that 66.4% of the men are below the average, and only 10.4% above it. Comparison with the white draft is significant, for only 7% of the white draft, as shown by the principal sampling for holograph analysis, were rated E, and only 47.7% were rated below the average. The percentages show that these low-grade men are 2 or 3 times as likely to commit offences as men of average intelligence, and from 4 to 6 times as likely to get into trouble as a men of markedly superior ability. Table 345 to 347 are displayed on the following page. Approximately the same state of affairs is shown by the study of 460 similar cases taken in October and November. Here there is shown a slightly greater tendency for men of a higher grade of intelligence to become offenders, but the percentage of E grades is still about 18, and there are still 64.8% of the men falling below the average. There are only a few cases included in the data from Camp McClellan, but the tendency of these cases is unmistakable. Nearly 42% of the offenders rated only E, and 92.3% were below the average. The figures from Camp Cody seem to contradict the others, but this difference arises because the number of cases here reported is only about 25% of all those tried at the camp. The other 75% were disposed of before the psychological examining was established there. Of approximately 250 men discharged for mental deficiency during the period of these early trials, the president of the Disability Board stated unofficially that Nearly all of them were discharged because they could not keep themselves out of the guardhouse for more than a week at a time. Had these men been retained in the service and confined, they would apparently have composed about 30% of the 850, 600 plus 250, court-martial convictions of the camp. The figures, like those from Camp Dix and McClellan, would then show that this group of mentally deficient men are 2 or 3 times more likely to get into trouble than the men of higher mental ability. It is interesting to note that the men who were acquitted rate considerably higher than the convicted men. Table 347 shows that of the 484 Negro offenders whose records were obtained at Camp Dix in October and November 1918, 39% rated only E. However, it must be noted that 31% of the entire Negro draft at this camp during July and August were not able to make more than an E grade. The evidence in the case of the Negroes, therefore, is not clear, but it still indicates the same tendency in a lesser degree. The distribution of the grades received by the Leavenworth prisoners is shown in Table 348, when comparison is made with the figures obtained from the principal sampling concerning the white draft. It will be seen that the Leavenworth prisoners form a group which is normal or average. There is a slight tendency to higher ratings than those obtained by the white draft, but it is probably not significant. This fact is rather striking in the face of the figures dealing with the prisoners in the camps. In Table 349, the two groups are compared, and the superiority of the Leavenworth men is evident. The facts shown in Table 349 are presented diagrammatically in Figure 54. It should be remembered that the prisoners at Leavenworth were convicted on serious charges by general court-martial, and those in the camp were convicted on minor charges. Thus it appears that low intelligence is a factor in less serious delinquencies, but in the graver difficulties, intelligence as measured by the Army tests, seems to play no part. Table 348 is displayed on the page. Figure 51 is displayed on the following page. And Table 349 is displayed on the following page. Section 2. Relation of intelligence, education, and kind of crime. For the purpose of the study of intelligence ratings in various criminal groups, the crimes for which the men were sentenced to Leavenworth were divided into the following categories. A. Crimes of acquisitiveness, as larceny, robbery, forgery, fraud, etc. P. Crimes of violence, as assault, fighting, murder, etc. S. Sex crimes of all descriptions. M. Purely military crimes, as absence without leave, desertion, escape, sleeping on post, drunk on post, discredit to uniform, allowing escape prisoners, etc. G. Military crimes of an aggressive nature and disrespect to officer, mutiny, disobedience of orders, insubordination, etc. D. Disloyalty, disloyal statements, disrespect to the United States, etc. R. Conscientious objectors of the religious type. Conscientious objectors of the political type. Q. Conscientious objectors because of being alien enemies, of having alien enemy relatives, of non-citizenship, and other like draft irregularities. This classification was made after considerable study of the data at hand, including the past reports of the institution and the personal cards of the men. The identification and grouping of the conscientious objectors, which was used in this study, was carried out as a part of the personal survey made just before the psychological survey took place. The records of 2,416 men make up the data used for this study. There is no reason to believe that there is any factor of selection in this group, for the men were taken at random just as they came to the examinations. It is possible that the results obtained present a good picture of the whole group of prisoners. The ordinary prisoners and the men in the disciplinary battalion are tabulated in separated groups. The men in the disciplinary battalion are those prisoners whose records during the first month or two of their confinement are such that they are given a trial with the idea of restoring them as soon as possible to the regular organizations of the Army. They are therefore a somewhat selected group. The following facts concerning the relation of intelligence to kind of crime are shown in Table 350. Table 350 is displayed on the page. 1. The men in the disciplinary battalion are in general a little above the regular prisoners in intelligence. However, this superiority is very slight, and is perhaps not significant in view of the fact that the number of men in the battalion is small. 2. The men sentenced for acquisitive crimes, Group A, are rather decidedly above the average, and above most of the other groups. 3. The conscientious objectors of the religious and political groups are high-grade men, very markedly above the average of the whole group. This superiority is especially noticeable in the case of the political objectors. 4. The men classed as conscientious objectors because of being alien enemies, having alien enemy relatives, etc., Q group, are decidedly low in intelligence. This seems to be the one group in the institution whose troubles we may ascribe to low mentality. 5. Men who commit aggressive crimes of a military nature, disobedience of orders, disrespect to officer, etc., are somewhat below the average mentality. On the other hand, however, men whose aggressiveness amounts to disloyalty are considerably better than the average group, as less than 20% of them fall below C. A supplementary study was made of the conscientious objectors who have continually refused to do any work. Of these, 6 refused to take any examination. The records of the others are given in Table 351. The superiority of these men to any other group in the institution is very apparent. Table 351 is displayed on the page. A study of education in various crime groups, using the same categories as before, was made. The records of 3,041 men were examined, and the results of the study were tabulated in Table 352. Table 352 is displayed on the page. A study of Table 352 brings out these facts. 1. For the prison population as a whole, the median falls in the 7th grade. There are 81.7% of the men who did not get beyond the common school, 14.6% who had some high school work, and 30.7% who got into college. 2. The men in the battalion are on the whole somewhat better educated than the regular prisoners. 3. Men convicted of sex crimes and crimes of violence have less education than the group average and less than most of the other groups. 4. The religious and political conscientious objectors are the best educated of the inmates. 5. The men convicted of the acquisitive crimes have more education than the average, and more than any of the other groups except the religious and political objectors. It is a noticeable fact that there is a marked relationship between the intelligence and the education of the various crime groups. For the study of this relationship, 3 groups were selected. 1. Prisoners, not conscientious objectors. 2. Conscientious objectors. And 3. The 2 groups combined. In classifying the men as to education, the highest grade reached was the group into which each man was put. 4 groups were made for the men who had more than a common school education. 1. Men who got into high school but did not graduate. 2. High school graduates. 3. Men who got into the university but did not graduate. And 4. University graduates. The results of this study are set forth in Tables 353 to 356. Table 353 to Table 356 are displayed on the following page. But the percentage tables and the correlation coefficients indicate a close relationship between intelligence and education. It is especially noticeable that the larger part of the E men got little or no schooling, while the A men only about 13% failed to get at least a common school education. Section 3. Recidivism as relation to intelligence. Data for the study of recidivism among the military prisoners at Leavenworth became available through records obtained in the psychiatric survey which took place coincidentally with the mental testing. The records of the man's previous criminal history were obtained by the psychiatrist in an interview and are perhaps not altogether trustworthy. It was the general belief, however, among the men who did the examining that the prisoners were for the most part truthful in their reports. Another source of error in the figures given here lies in the fact that some of the worst cases were in isolation or solitary confinement, and so could not be examined either by the psychiatrists or psychologists. It is more likely that some of the worst recidivists were in this group. On the basis of the records, the prisoners were classed into what may be called, for want of a better term, recidivist groups. These groups were as follows. 1. Men reporting no previous criminal history. 2. Men who had been found guilty of minor delinquencies, such as drunkenness, disorderly conduct, violation of the traffic regulations, and who had been punished by fines or short sentences in jails, workhouses, and such institutions. 3. Men who had been sentenced to reformatories. 4. Men who had served time for serious offences in prisons and penitentiaries. In case a man's record was such that he would fall in 2 or more of these groups, he was classified according to his worst offence. It became apparent as soon as these figures were examined that the results were affected by the inclusion of the political prisoners. Because of this fact, tables were prepared giving separately data for conscientious objectors and ordinary prisoners, as well as a combination including the entire group. A comparison of the recidivist records of the conscientious objectors and other prisoners, see Table 357, shows that very few of the former have gotten into difficulties previous to their becoming a part of the military establishment. It should be noted that these previous difficulties were probably also the result of political or religious beliefs and activities. Table 357 is displayed on the page. Table 358, 359, and 360 show the distribution of recidivist groups of men making each intelligence rating. It is quite clear that the A men and the E men have less difficulties than others, for among the A men 82.1% and among the E men 78.9% admit no previous criminal history. However, a fair percentage of the E men did get into minor difficulties. It is hard to choose from the other intelligence groups the one which contains a greater percent of repeated offenders. The C, B, and D men have slightly higher records of recidivism, but the C plus and C men are not very different. The facts seem to be practically the same both for the separate groups and for the group of living with prisoners as a whole. In Tables 361, 362, and 363, the data are presented in another way. These tables show the percentage of the different intelligence ratings in each recidivist group. Comparing the figures with the percentage for the total group, the men admitting no criminal history have comparatively more A's and more E's. The men having prison or penitentiary records contain 56% of C and D men. Tables 358 to Table 363 are displayed on the following page. There are two important conclusions which may be made on the basis of the foregoing figures. First, probably not more than 50% of the military prisoners were men who got into trouble in civil life. Second, men of very high and very low intelligence seem less likely to get into difficulties, at least in civil life, than other men. A question which psychologists were frequently called upon to decide in connection with disciplinary cases was, is this man of such mentality that he can be held responsible for his misdemeanors? On the basis of mental age, leaving out pathological nervous conditions, hereditary training, and like effects, it may be possible to answer yes or no. There is hard to fix an exact limit below which a man is to be considered irresponsible and above which he is to be held strictly accountable. Rather should we have a series of degrees of responsibility correlated with a series of degrees of intelligence. Probably men rated E should not be held responsible in a court-martial. The frequency with which they get into trouble and their failure to profit by discipline are presumably the result of mental limitations. Such a conclusion is supported by the nature of their offences, which are for the most part of the minor sort that are conditioned more upon lack of judgment than upon malicious intent. The frequency of delinquency among men of average intelligence indicates that defective intelligence is only one of many factors that lead to military offences. In a large number of cases, military offences among men of average intelligence must be due to military conditions, for the percentage of recidivism is not high. Political causes and unjust operations of the military system itself undoubtedly account for most of the intelligent novices in offence. With such cases, the psychologist in the army can do nothing. His activities cannot go farther than a designation of those few low-grade men who cannot be held responsible in any practical degree under military regime. Section 4. Intelligence of prostitutes. Psychological examination of female prostitutes was conducted in the neighborhood of several camps by army psychologists through the cooperation of military authorities and various local or national agencies, such as the United States Public Health Service, the War Training Camp Activities, civilian police officials, and law and order societies. The most complete data available are for the port of embarkation, Newport News, Vancouver. Here prostitutes were examined regularly upon admission into the city detention home. The Goddard revision of the Binet-Simon scale was used in order to secure uniformity with the work of a previous examiner. The women came from almost every part of the United States, east of the Mississippi River, and some from beyond. The outstanding result of their examination is that 53%, 44% white and 68% colored, showed a mental age of 10 years or under, see Table 364, and that 35% of the group showed themselves to be in Year 10. While in all probability a part of this group is concentrated at Year 10 solely because of the nature of the scale used, yet other investigations also show in general that the prostitute is usually not an institutionally deficient woman, but a high-grade moron. A psychiatric examination of this group of women showed that 15% were abnormal in some other respect, as alcoholics, drug addicts, epileptics, or having dementia praecox. Table 364 is displayed on the page. A group of 39 questionable women were examined at Ross County Infirmary, Ohio, by the psychologists at Camp Sherman. This group was given examination alpha. No one scored A, 5% scored B, 8% C+, 28% C, 28% C-, and 31% D. By transmitting these scores into mental age, correlation with the Stanford Binet scale, we find that 31% of this group had a mental age of 10 or under. A psychiatric examination by an officer of the medical corps showed 15% of this group also to be abnormal in other ways. At Camp Greenleaf, 71 prostitutes were examined in the Crittenton home, Chattanooga, Tennessee, adjoining the camp. The psychological records cards of these women show the following distributions. A table is displayed on the page. By transmitting the numerical scores for the above alpha examinations into the corresponding mental age, we obtain the data presented in Table 365. The combined result shows again very clearly the low intelligence of prostitutes. There are 50.7% with a mental age of 10 or under. The result agrees closely with the data from Newport News, which, although quite differently derived geographically, showed 58.2% with a mental age of 10 or less. Table 365 is displayed on the page. In summary, we may note that 1. The results of army examining of prostitutes corroborate in conclusion, attained by civilian examinations of prostitutes in various parts of the country, that from 30 to 60% of prostitutes are deficient and are for the most part high-grade morons. And 2. That 15 to 25% of all prostitutes are so low-grade mentally that it is wise, as well as possible under existing laws in most states, permanently to segregate them in institutions for the feeble-minded. End of section 36. Section 37 of Psychological Examining in the United States Army by Mearns Yerkes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Harvey. Chapter 13. Influence of certain physical conditions on the intelligence score. Typhoid inoculation. Because of the criticisms frequently urged regarding the possible injurious effects of a recent typhoid inoculation on performance in the psychological examination, a comparison was made at Camp Custer of the intelligence scores of 178 men who had been given their complete inoculation approximately 24 hours before examination, with the scores of 239 men of the same unit who had not had recent inoculation, and also with the scores of the entire increment of the same month of 7,167 men. The first comparison made was between 70 men, who themselves judged that their showing on the scale had been affected by their recent inoculation, and the remaining 108 men who felt this to have no effect. The means are practically identical. A table is displayed on the page. Comparing next with the means of those recently inoculated with those not recently inoculated, we have. A table is displayed on the page. The difference found in the last comparison is of doubtful significance in view of the fact that this group contained a good many superior men who were being held over the Depot Brigade because of possible fitness for officers' training camps. The following comparison of the inoculated group with the 7,167 men who made up the entire July 1918 increment is deemed more satisfactory. A table is displayed on the page. The results seem to show that no significant effect on alpha scores is produced by taking the examination 20 to 24 hours after an anti-typhoid inoculation, and that the men's own judgment on this point is unreliable. There are 4 chances in 5 that with another pair of samples the difference would be reversed. Hookworm disease. A comparison was made at Camp Travis between the intelligence scores of 632 white men and 130 Negroes who were infected with hookworm, and the scores of 5,615 white men and 2,877 Negroes who were free from the disease. The comparison includes both alpha and beta scores and involved the following numbers. The table is displayed on the page. The percentage distribution of weighted scores for the white alpha groups, 501 infected and 4,792 non-infected, were as follows. The table is displayed on the page. The difference is too large to be explained as the chance result of sampling. The ratio of the difference of the means to the standard deviation of that difference is 7.96, which means that the chances are infinitely small, less than 1 in 10,000, that as great a difference could occur by chance. The percentage distributions of scores for the 131 infected and 823 non-infected white men who took beta were as follows. A table is displayed on the page. Chances that as great a difference could result from sampling are 48 in 1,000. The percentage distribution of scores for the 74 infected and 1,817 non-infected Negroes who took alpha were as follows. Table is displayed on the page. The corresponding comparison for the 56 infected and the 1,060 non-infected Negroes who took beta. The table is displayed on the page. In the case of the Negroes, both in the alpha and beta group, the chances are very great, 826 in 1,000, that a difference as large as that found could have resulted from errors of sampling. This is a marked contrast with the findings for white men, and the results may mean that hookworm disease has a more serious effect on whites than on Negroes. There is available also a report from Camp Lee on the scores of examination A of 97 white men infected with hookworm disease. Of 121 who appeared for psychological examination, 20% were found to be illiterate, as against 18% illiterate for the regiment as a whole. The median of the distribution of the 97 illiterates who took examination A is 80, whereas the median for the entire regiment is 102. Comparing the frequencies of the two distributions, we find the chances to be only 14 in 1,000, that as great a difference could have occurred by sampling. This result tends to confirm the data obtained from Camp Travis. It is important, however, to guard against the assumption that data of this kind prove the existence of a causal relation between hookworm disease and mental inferiority. Low native ability may induce such conditions of living as to result in hookworm infection, or poor environmental conditions may be responsible for both the disease and the low test record. Venereal disease. Camp made reported intelligence ratings by letter grades from alpha, beta, and individual examinations of a development battalion composed of 1,231 Negro venerals. The grades are here compared with those of 32,916 unselected Negroes of several draft increments. The percentage distributions of grades were as follows. A table is displayed on the page. Compared with unselected white recruits, both groups are very inferior, but the venereal group is slightly superior in intelligence to the non-venereal. The difference, however, is no greater than the differences frequently found between Negro draft increments from different sections of the country. Unfortunately, the geographical origin of this venereal group is not known. Following are figures for 1,562 white venerals composing 4 companies of another development battalion, also reported from the Camp Meade. The 167,035 cases with which they are compared include unselected white draft increments from 10 different camps and are probably fairly representative of white recruits for the entire country. As therefore, the ratings include those from alpha, beta, and individual examinations. A table is displayed on the page. Here we find an evident inferiority of the venereal group, though the difference is not great. It should be emphasized, however, that comparison of this kind, even if they disclose large differences between the intelligence scores of venereal and non-venereal groups, could not be accepted as throwing any light on the possible influence of the venereal condition on mental efficiency. Such a difference might be more reasonably interpreted as an indication that men of inferior intelligence are more likely to expose themselves to venereal infection or less likely to employ suitable prophylactic measures. In view of this possibility, the following study from Camp Lee is of interest. Camp Lee reported the psychological grades of 317 white venerals. In this case, a psychological examination had been given several months before the men were segregated for venereal disease. The grades are, therefore, not those of venerals, but of men who later became venereal. The median weighted score on Examination A for these 317 white literates was 117, as compared with 142 for the white literates of the entire camp at the time of the examination. The percent of venereal cases obtaining a grade A or B was 4.4, as compared with 10% for the entire camp, and the percent making D or E was 40, as compared with 26 for the entire camp. From these figures it would appear that men of inferior intelligence were considerably more likely than men of superior intelligence to contract a venereal disease under the conditions of army life prevalent in that camp at that time. End of section 37. Section 38 of Psychological Examining in the United States Army by Mearns Yerkes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Harvey. Chapter 14. Relation of Intelligence Ratings to Age. The dependence of intelligence upon age of adults is a theoretical problem of great interest, upon which, however, the results of psychological examining in the Army can throw little light. It is possible to draw up tables of intelligence ratings and age, as reported on the examination blank, to compute the regressions, and thus to determine the relation between age of officers or of men in the Army and their intelligence. But with the relationship once determined, there is still no way of saying to what extent it reflects the fundamental dependence of intelligence upon age, or to what extent it may be caused by the selective processes always at work in separating the Army from the total population of the country. If among the older men only the more intelligent sought to be officers, or were so well established in life that they could not afford to be officers, or if, on the contrary, among the older men only the poorer professional men could leave their businesses to enter the Army, or were industrially unessential so that they were forced into the Army, then we should find a very positive relation of the one sort or the other between intelligence and age in the Army, a relation which would arise entirely as a result of selection in the Army, and be utterly fictitious as an indicator of dependence of intelligence on adult age in general. Similar selective factors might work equally well in the case of drafted men. At best, then, we cannot expect much from a study of age and intelligence ratings in military records, and for this reason, under the pressure of time and insufficient clerical personnel, the hollerist sortings between age and intelligence ratings of the white and the Negro drafts as originally planned for the principal sample were abandoned. The sortings were carried out for officers because a greater range of ages made some sort of positive relationship, whatever its interpretation likely. These figures are available, and to them may be added the results of studies on either Examination A or Alpha from 6 camps. The results are for the most part self-consistent in that they show a slight but persistent tendency for decrease of mean intelligence ratings with age, at least in the higher age groups, which range above the upper limit of the draft. They are presented in order that the facts may be at hand. In view of our ignorance of the operation of the selective process in the Army, it is unsafe for us to assert that the apparent relation is not spurious. The most reasonable surmise is that older officers are selected more on the basis of their specific experience and training, professional or military, and less on native intelligence than are younger officers who have, as yet, little valuable experience. Given time for it to accrue, it may be that experience offsets intelligence of the requisites for an Army officer. The medical corps, for example, is distinctly a professional corps, and its officers are consequently on the average much older than any other group of officers. See below. The low level of the intelligence ratings in this corps may be in part due to the selection of officers on the basis of professional experience and availability rather than on general mental ability. It has been argued that older officers are at an unfair disadvantage in the Alpha examination, and that they have the kind of intelligence that works surely but slowly. That Alpha is speed test. It was never clear in practice, however, that the older officers actually did do more poorly than the younger. It appeared as if it might be that the older officers who made poor ratings simply attracted to themselves more attention than did the young officers with low grades. The present data do seem to establish the fact of a definite tendency for the older men to obtain slightly lower scores than the younger. The difference is as it has been claimed, but it is not great. The interpretation of this tendency is another matter. It cannot be said on the basis of present information to point to a decrease of intelligence with age, or even to a decrease with age of the ability to succeed in the so-called speed test alpha. Table 366 gives the comparative data on 15,385 white officers from Group 6 of the principal sample. These data are shown graphically in figures 55 and 56. The class intervals of age are those coded in the principal sample. They proceed by 2-year intervals within the limits of the draft, i.e. up to 30 years, and thereafter by decades. It will be noted that the A ratings decrease and the C ratings increase with age. The medians regularly decrease. The graphic representation of figures 55 and 56 is striking. The extreme groups, less than 21 above 60 years, are the smallest in size and may be left out of account in the general tendency. Figure 55 is displayed on the page, and Table 366 and Figure 56 are displayed on the following page. A study was made at Camp Dix of the relation between age and score, alpha, for officers. 3 groups were compared: line officers, quartermaster officers, and medical officers. Table 367 indicates roughly the variation of scores with change in age groups. The table shows slight lowering of the score with increasing age. In the 3 age groups, line officers maintain their percentage for scores of 350 and above. Medical officers show increase in the numbers scoring above 350. All 3 branches give increases in numbers and percentages of those scoring below 250. However, the differences for the age groups are slight. The range Q2 to Q1 increases with increasing age. The general trend of the medians is downward with the higher ages. Table 367 is displayed on the page. Tables 368, 369, and 370 give comparisons of officer groups at Camps Taylor, Greenleaf, and Lee. In all cases, there is a definite trend toward decreasing score with increasing age. These tables are based on Examination A. Tables 368 to Table 370 are displayed on the page. Camp Devens reported the data from Examination A that are summarized in Table 371. Here the age distribution of medical officers, 146 cases, is approximately normal. Its median is about 37 years. The median age of infantry officers is 25.4. Tetrachoric correlations of age with score gave negative 0.0107 for medical officers and positive 0.12 for infantry officers. The modes of the distributions for all officers and for the infantry groups fall near age 25 with decidedly skewed distributions. The small number of cases in the higher age groups makes comparisons uncertain. Nevertheless, the drift is again in the direction of decreasing score with increasing age. If we accept the criterion that a difference between means which is 3 times its probable error is significant, we find that the age group 21 to 25 is superior to the group 26 to 30, or to any higher group. Above 35 years in these data, there is no significant difference between age groups. Table 371 is displayed on the page. Although the general trend towards decreasing score with increasing age can thus be unequivocally made out, the deviation of individual cases from the rule is very wide indeed. On the average, older men score lower, but the chances that a particular older officer will make a lower score than a particular younger one are very little greater than that the reverse will be the case. The scale of the cases is wide, and the coefficients of correlation are correspondingly small. The following coefficients of correlation between age and score in Examination A illustrate the point. 5,404 medical officers, Camp Greenleaf, minus 0.192. 2,475 medical officers, Camp Greenleaf, 21 to 30 years, minus 0.063. PE, 0.013. 3,267 medical officers, Camp Greenleaf, 30 to 60 years, minus 0.192, PE, 0.011. 146 medical officers, Camp Devens, minus 0.011. 308 infantry officers, Camp Devens, minus 0.120. The question arises as to whether this inverse relation of age and score begins at 21 years, the lowest age, or at some higher point. The general evidence of the data on officers is that with officers the decrease is continuous throughout the range of ages. The data of the principal sample in Table 366 and the data from Camps Greenleaf and Devons in Tables 369 and 371 all show a continuous trend between the years 21 and 30. Camps Dix, Taylor and Lee, Tables 367, 368 and 370, appear not to show a trend in either direction with these limits. There are certain meagre data on enlisted men, who naturally fell between the ages of 20 and 31, which also fail to show any decrease of score with age. A report from Camp Lee gives, for 594 white enlisted men, the following median score in Examination A. A table is displayed on the page. Camp Upton reports alpha scores of 600 white enlisted men for the two extreme age groups within the draft limits. A table is displayed on the page. Here there seems to be an increase, if anything. In a corresponding report from Camp Upton on 600 Negro enlisted men, there is a definite increase. A table is displayed on the page. These data are, however, scanty and quite possibly reflect in every case different principles of selection of work within the Army. At best we can say that a general trend for officers throughout the entire range is made out, but that this trend with officers or enlisted men may not be definite within the decade of the draft ages. The distribution of ages for officers within the various branches of the service is interesting as affecting the comparison of these branches. Table 372 shows these distributions. Most frequently the medians fall in 27 to 28 group, whereas the median for the group of officers taken as a whole 28.8. The artillery officers are a little younger than the rest. The officers of the field signal battalions and of the quartermaster corps are slightly older. Officers in the medical corps are very much older. The median for this corps falls at 37.6 years, and more than 3/4 of the group are over 30 years old, and slightly more than 1/3 over 40 years. This fact is of special interest in connection with the low rating of medical officers, see Chapter 16. In the total group of officers, a little more than 1/3, 38%, are over 30 years of age. Table 372 is displayed on the page. End of section 38. Section 39 of Psychological Examining in the United States Army by Robert Mearns Yerkes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Leon Harvey. Chapter 15. Intelligence Ratings of Occupational Groups. The relationship between intelligence as measured by the Army's psychological examinations and various occupational groups was a byproduct of the development of the Army's psychological work. Serious study of this relationship was not attempted in the early months, largely because the attention of the psychological examiners was not called to the possible uses of intelligence ratings in connection with the occupational classification and placement of men. A number of studies had been made, however, prior to the signing of the armistice, and the indications are that they would have been carried still further had not the military situation changed so radically. The first study reported was made at Camp Dix during October 1917. It is concerned with the relationship between intelligence, Examination A, skill, Stanquist skill test, wages, earnings prior to entering the Army, and 19 occupations. Table 373 gives the 204 cases showing the relationship between the average scores in intelligence and the 19 reported occupations. Table 373 is displayed on the page. It is obvious that the number of cases involved in the table is too small to justify positive conclusions regarding intelligence differences among various occupations. The average scores are so unreliable because no method was available for measuring the intelligence of foreigners and illiterates. Any such cases included in the study were thus unfairly scored 0. No attempt was made to interpret the possible uses of such a table beyond a suggestion that the many contradictions between intelligence scores and wages would enable the personnel officers to use intelligence scores as a partial guide in judging the ability of men. The assumption was that a wage criterion of ability is unreliable. The next study, reported from Camp Lee, was based upon 2,707 soldiers in the 320th and 318th Regiments. 35 occupations were represented by more than 10 cases each. The quartile values were not determined, and the range of intelligence scores in any particular occupational group is therefore unknown. The average scores for the various occupations listed do not represent accurate measures of the mental ability of the representatives in camp or elsewhere, or those occupations for the reason that they are based upon the performances of illiterate white men only. Illiterates and foreigners are excluded from the study because no means was available at the time for measuring their intelligence. See Table 374. Table 374 is displayed on the page. With the revision of examination methods and the extension of psychological examining to all camps, a number of additional studies were reported, and a standardized coordinated study was made by a number of the camps under the direction of the Division of Psychology. The necessity for using intelligence ratings in the occupational assignment and placement of men in the Army was brought sharply to the fore in the experience of the personnel and psychological officers at Camp Wadsworth. Here the personnel officer picked 20 clerical workers for special detail to the psychological board. Two facts immediately became apparent. About one-third of the men were inefficient and incompetent, and the same one-third had intelligence ratings below C+. The attention of the personnel officer was called to this state of affairs, and he agreed that successful placement of men involved the utilization of intelligence ratings. The realization of the need for occupational intelligence standards resulted in the following study. The personnel adjutant made a list of 55 occupations which he considered to be of special value to the Army. Upon the completion of the psychological examinations of the draft of May 25 and June 4, 1918, all record cards containing the alpha grades of literate white men were classified for 55 occupations. The scores or grades were tabulated, the number of cases in each occupation noted, and the first quartile, median, and third quartile scores calculated. Each occupation was ranked with all other occupations according to the median scores. The results of this study are shown in Table 375. It will be noted that the occupations embracing unskilled labourers have the lowest median scores. Then come the occupations involving semi-skilled labour. Next higher are the skilled trades. The technical trades are next, while the professional workers are the highest of all. It is to be expected that certain inconsistencies would appear in such a study. At that time, the extremely low median scores of 99 for printers was commented upon and interpreted as being due to the fact that many who call themselves printers were not really printers, but had merely been employed in one capacity or another in the printing offices. Presumably, this was true of many individuals in each occupational group. In the absence of reliable trade tests to classify men occupationally, it was felt that the placement of men occupationally could be done with greater accuracy if the selection were made with reference to the median intelligence scores. For example, there are many soldiers who claim to have been clerical workers, but who are of inferior or very inferior intelligence. In order to avoid mistakes in placing such individuals, the safe thing to do would be to select those soldiers who are above the median ability of their group. Table 375 is displayed on the page. The number of cases representative of most of the occupational groups is too small to give a reliable distribution of intelligence scores for those groups. The median and quartile scores are so unreliable because they are based upon literate whites only. The median and quartile scores are therefore more unreliable for those occupations having low scores, for it is those occupations that contain the largest proportion of foreign and native illiterates. The question of definition of each occupational group has not been given the consideration that is necessary. Each individual represented in the tabulation classified himself in filling in the blank items on the psychological record card. It is evident that such occupational classification is very loose, and is much less reliable than the classification arrived at through the personal interview. The looseness and unsatisfactoriness of the procedure that was used is indicated by such general terms as engineers, railroad worker, and clerks. This latter term included various kinds of clerks, and even typists and stenographers. It is evident that improvement in delivering a table of occupational intelligence standards would depend upon a more precise standard of occupational definition and classification, a great increase in the number of cases in each group, and a method of recording the intelligence scores that would include the scores of illiterate Americans and foreigners as well as literates. Realizing the need for a reliable table of occupational intelligence standards, the Division of Psychology of the Surgeon General's Office undertook to direct the study in such a manner as to avoid the statistical errors involved in the previous studies. Before presenting this investigation, it may be of interest to note the results of the Camp Devon study, which is quite comparable to the Wordsworth study. The study is based on the results of the alpha examination of the May, June, and July drafts of 1918, Literate Whites. 57 occupations are presented, representing 15,122 men. The first quartile, median, and third quartile scores are given for each occupational group. The results are shown in Table 376. Table 376 is displayed on the page. The number of cases representing most of the occupational groups is large enough to give reliable distributions of intelligence scores for those groups. The median and quartile scores, however, are unreliable because they are based upon literate whites only. No indication is given concerning the method of occupational definition and the methods of classifying each case. The chief interest in this study for the present report is a possibility of comparing it with the Wordsworth study in certain particulars. Unfortunately, there are only 29 occupations common to both studies. These 29 occupations were ranked according to the median scores shown in the Wordsworth study and also as shown in the Devon study. These two rank orders were then compared. The Spearman R value equals positive 0.71, which corresponds to a Pearson R value of positive 0.90. This indicates that in general, the relative rating of these 29 occupations according to intelligence is much the same in the Wordsworth study as in the Devon study. It is interesting to note that of these 29 occupations, 23 had a higher median score in the Devon study than in the Wordsworth study, and only 6 had a lower median score. The average difference in score is 16.3 points. The median score of the literate whites in the Wordsworth draft was 121. The median score of the literate whites in the Devon survey was 133. This is a difference of 12 points. It is probable that the higher median scores, both for the occupational groups and for the general survey groups in Camp Devon's as compared with Wordsworth groups, was due to a slightly higher literacy standard in the former camp. It was pointed out in discussing the Wordsworth study that in all probability the median score of 99 points for printers was unreliable. That this point of view was correct is indicated by the fact that the Devon's printers have a median score of 162 points. This disagreement of 63 points for a given occupational group is the greatest disagreement that was found between the two studies. The similarities found in the above comparison indicate that these two occupational investigations are roughly accurate and justify themselves on practical grounds. The interest shown by personnel officers in the Wordsworth study indicated that such a table of occupational intelligence ratings was of considerable value for Army personnel work. The Division of Psychology of the Surgeon General's Office planned a much more comprehensive study and sent out a letter to all chief psychological examiners requesting that score distributions for certain occupational groups be tabulated and reported to the Surgeon General's Office at the earliest possible moment. The letter requested data on 114 occupations, an urgent list of 69, and an additional list of 45. These occupations were designated by the Committee on Classification of Personnel for such special report. Instructions covering the method of securing and recording the data were also included in the letter. Effort was made to avoid the errors of the earlier studies. The question of precise standard of occupational definition and classification was solved by referring in each case to the soldier's qualification card. It was planned to secure enough cases in each occupational group to give reliable standards, and to ensure this, each examining station was requested to report on from 1,000 to 10,000 cases. The provision was also made to record both alpha and beta scores. The work of assembling and analyzing the data was done by Dr. James W. Bridges in the Office of the Surgeon General and was completed by September 1, 1918. At that time, reports had been received from 16 camps, viz., Sherman, Sheridan, Lee, Greenleaf, Logan, Wheeler, Custer, Grant, Cody, Jackson, Dix, Travis, Pike, Gordon, Funston, and Taylor. The report as made by Dr. Bridges is as follows. After the data were tabulated and summarized, it was found that, for many occupations, there were too few cases to give a reliable range or central tendency. Upon the basis of reliability of records, the 114 occupations were grouped into 5 classes. Each class contains occupations of which there is a certain range of cases, and the steps from group to group represent equal decrease of reliability. The limiting numbers are roughly the squares 16, 12, 9, and 6. The group's range of cases and number of occupations in each are as follows. Table 377 is displayed on the following pages. Groups A, B, C, and D were considered separately, but no further study was made of the 46 occupations in Group E. Additional data on these are needed, and it would seem desirable also to obtain further reports on Groups C and D. The data for the 68 occupations of Group A, B, C, D are summarized in Table 378. The median and quartile scores are given for the alpha cases and for the beta cases of each occupation, and for apprentices, journeymen, and experts separately. The occupations within each group are arranged in the order of symbols by the Committee on Classification of Personnel. In order to render the data of Table 377 more usable, the percentage receiving each letter grade was determined for each occupation. In doing this, apprentices, journeymen, and experts were combined, for the differences were not, as a rule, significant, and the classification was made for the most part on the basis of personal interview and not by means of trade tests. Both alpha and beta numerical scores were converted into letter grades on the percent basis, August 8, 1918. These letter ratings were then combined, and the percentage receiving each grade as well as percentage distributions were calculated. The percentage distributions are given in Table 378. Table 378 is displayed on the following page. In order to obtain a more direct comparison of the intelligence requirements of the occupations, a composite graph, Figure 57, was prepared. This shows the median and range of the middle 50% for each occupation. In this graph, the occupations are arranged in order from inferior to superior, based upon the position of the median score in the letter grade intervals, irrespective of the number of cases from which the median was calculated. The position of the median and quartile scores were computed from the percentage distributions of letter grades. Figure 57 is displayed on the page. Before attempting to evaluate the significance of the data presented in the above tables, it would be well to consider carefully some general criticisms of the work. The significance of these data is limited because of 2 general difficulties inherent in the Army situation at the time the data were gathered. In the first place, the data are representative of draft quotas only, and the nature of draft quotas is dependent upon the selective factors at work to produce them. In the second place, the accuracy of the data for any occupational group is dependent upon the accuracy of the personal methods then operative in classifying recruits occupationally and in differentiating between levels of skill or expertness. These 2 general criticisms will be discussed in order. It must be borne in mind that draft quotas arrived in camps in accordance with the operation of the Selective Service Act. Only those between 21 and 31 were registered prior to September 1918. More than 7/10 of those registering were placed in the deferred classes. Provision was made to place in deferred classes 1. Necessary skilled farm or industrial labourers in essential agricultural or industrial enterprises. 2. Highly trained firemen or policemen in service of municipality. 3. Necessary assistant, associate, and hired manager of essential agricultural enterprise. 4. Necessary highly specialized technical or mechanical expert of essential industrial enterprise. 5. Necessary assistant or associate or sole manager of essential industrial enterprise. 6. All legislative, executive, or judicial officers of the United States or a state, territory, or District of Columbia. 7. Ministers or students of religion, and all necessary employers in the service of the United States, necessary custom house clerks, necessary employees in the transmission of mails, and mariners and licensed pilots. In addition to the above determinants for occupational, industrial, and religious reasons, we have 7 different conditions of dependency involving varying degrees of deferment. Of the 6,973,270 total deferments and exemptions, we find 473,892, or 6.8%, who were given deferred classification because of occupational and industrial reasons. 34,740, or 0.5%, because of religious reasons. 3,559,099, or 51.1%, because of various conditions of dependency. 619,727, or 8.9%, because they were already in the military or naval service of the United States. 540,226, or 7.75%, because they were totally and permanently physically, mentally, or morally unfit to be a soldier. And 918,178, or 13.16%, because of alien allegiance. The 619,727 men already in the military or naval service of the United States were for the most part members of the various National Guard organizations, or were volunteers in the regular Army, National Guard, or in officers' training camps and the naval service. Although there are no figures available, it is probable that this volunteer group is much above the average intelligence of the latter draft quotas. The 473,892 men in deferred classes for occupational and industrial reasons are undoubtedly much above the average of men in the same occupation who were not considered to be sufficiently necessary to be given deferred classification. Clearly, the Selective Service Act tended to keep out the Army the most skilled and most intelligent in those agricultural or industrial enterprises that were considered essential. For this reason, one cannot hold that the occupational intelligence standards set forth in the above tables are reliable standards of the intelligence of various occupational groups in civic life. With the facts in mind concerning the tendency of the Selective Service Act to send men to camp who on the average are probably slightly inferior to the average of the general population, we can readily explain some of the inconsistencies involved in Figure 57. That farmers should be ranked so low in intelligence is surprising. In all probability, the bulk of this group represents unmarried, unskilled farm labourers. The married, with dependents, and the necessary skilled farm labourers in essential agricultural enterprises were exempted according to the provisions of the Selective Service Act. The loose standing of tailors is probably due to a loose definition of that trade. Many are probably classified as tailors who do routine mechanical machine labour in large tailoring establishments. Also, there is probably a large percentage of the group who are a foreign percentage. Such a fact in itself would lower the rating of the group. Our railroads were classified as essential industries, and exemptions have undoubtedly occurred in the case of locomotive engine men and firemen. Those engine men and firemen who failed to obtain exemption are probably those who, because of inferior ability, were unable to secure the necessary affidavits declared them to be necessary for the industry. The data for these two groups is therefore probably unreliable. That the engineer group has a rating slightly, although not significantly inferior to that of the fireman group, seems to indicate that the ratings of men in these two groups have been seriously affected by selection. It is entirely possible that many of the occupational groups, particularly those skilled in technical trades in the middle of the graph, are misplaced relative to one another, and it is possible too that many of them show too low a median rating. The exceptions granted the necessary highly specialized technical or mechanical expert of necessary industrial enterprise have undoubtedly tended to leave as representative of the affected trade those who are below the average attainment of the trade in civil life. In addition to that specified exemption factor, we have the fact that those in a given trade who were married and had dependents were exempted. It is reasonable to suppose that those skilled and technical workers in a trade that have married and thus assume the social and family responsibility involved therein are superior on the average to those who have remained unmarried and were therefore not placed in deferred classification. Among the professional groups, we find similar selective factors at work to lower the ratings of those groups. For example, it is doubtful whether the accountants found in draft quotas are representative of accountants found in civil life. It is probable that most certified public accountants were accepted because of marriage involving dependents or because their technical and expert knowledge was needed by essential industrial enterprises. It is probable that some of the occupational groups show a reverse tendency, viz. A higher median intelligence rating than is typical for the corresponding group in civil life. It is possible that the group of stenographers and typists is such. It has been suggested that many college and university students who had learned to use a typewriter classified themselves occupationally as typists upon arrival in depot brigades, and it is certain that a majority of college and university students are above the average intelligence of stenographers and typists in civil life, as the latter rarely go beyond high school. It must also be remembered that many stenographers and typists are not typical representatives of that particular clerical occupation in civil life. The United States Census, 1910, states that female stenographers and typists are 5 times as frequent as males. In the preceding paragraphs, enough has been said to indicate that the occupational intelligence standards are representative of draft quotas only, and that because of selective factors, those Army standards may be quite different from the standards of civil life. Not only must the selective factors be considered, but the accuracy of the personal classification system must be taken into account in determining the significance of the data at hand. The trade classification of the men was based on the personal interviewing method. Trade tests had not come into general use at the time the study was made. It is possible that the personal interviewing method was sufficiently inaccurate to affect the reliability of the occupational intelligence standards. A study of Table 377 shows that consistent significant differences in mental ability between apprentices, journeymen, and experts are not present. Of the 32 occupations of Group A, we find only 16 which show the experts as superior to the journeymen, and journeymen superior to apprentices, and these 16 cases involved only the alpha ratings. With regard to the beta ratings, only 6 occupations show these differences. The differences that are present are only slight. For the alpha ratings, the differences between the medians and the 3 degrees of skilled vary from 2 to 13 points, the median differences being 7 points. The beta ratings are not so consistent. These differences vary between 2 points and 34 points, the median difference being 11 points. It seems reasonable to suppose that a selective process goes on in industry which results in a selection of the mentally more alert for promotion from the apprentice stage to the journeyman stage, and likewise from the journeyman stage to the expert. Those inferior mentally would stick to the lower levels of skill or be weeded out of the particular trade. On this hypothesis, one begins to question the accuracy of the personal interviewing procedure. It is to be noted that the hypothesis does not assume that skill and intelligence are synonymous. It merely involves the assumption that, other things being equal, the more intelligent will succeed better in any given trade. The validity of this hypothesis will be brought out later in connection with some data derived from occupational groups that have been trade tested. It is well to point out in passing that other things are not equal. In addition to intelligence, we have a special ability fitting one for a special trade, and we have trade customs that operate to promote from one level of expertness to a higher one on the basis of time spent in the trade. This latter fact militates against the selection of only the most efficient in the higher levels of skill. According to this custom, the weak and the strong, the efficient and the inefficient alike proceed from the apprenticeship stage to the expert stage merely by fulfilling the requirement of time. The classification of soldiers into the A, apprentice, J, journeyman, and E, expert groups of skill in any trade and occupation by the personal interviewing method was based partially on the recognition and utilization of this concept, that time spent in the trade is the chief differentiating factor. Insofar as the personal system utilized such a criterion, it is to be inferred that mistakes were made. The data presented would indicate the desirability of objective measurements of trade ability. While it is probable that mistakes were made as indicated above, it is also probable that many soldiers were classified in occupations in which they actually possessed no ability. The use of trade tests in the camps indicates that approximately 30% of the men claiming trade ability are really novices in their trade. Thus, a table of occupational intelligence standards must be looked upon as far from perfect, as being merely indicative as a representative in a general way only of conditions as they exist in depot brigades receiving draft quotas selected under the provisions of the Selective Service Act. Such limitations upon the accuracy of the standards do not invalidate the use of such a table in preventing the misplacement of the poorest 10 or 25% of each occupational group. Such rough and practical use would probably justify itself in a resulting increased percentage of successful placement. The above criticisms must not be emphasized to the exclusion of certain features of the study that are of the utmost significance. This significance is not limited to its function as an additional aid for Army personnel work, but has wider application in the fields of economic theory, employment management, and vocational guidance and training. Figure 57 brings out the fact that there seem to be 4 or 5 occupational levels. The highest level might be termed the professional level, and is probably subdivided into 2 parts. Those professional groups having very high educational and professional standards, median intelligence rating A, and those professional groups having slightly lower educational and professional standards, median intelligence rating B. The next lower level contains such occupational groups as clerical workers, technical workers, and probably those skilled mechanics and skilled operatives who, because of high average intelligence and leadership, become foremen. The median intelligence at this level is C+. In the next lower level, we have apparently a larger number of occupational groups than in any other. The bulk of these occupational groups fall under the heading of skilled mechanics and skilled operatives and the semi-skilled worker. Median intelligence of this level is C. The lowest level is next and contains those occupational groups that may be characterized as unskilled labor. Median intelligence this level is C-. To demonstrate whether the differences between these 4 or 5 levels are significant, statistical methods were utilized in the case of the midmost occupations in each group. In the lowest occupational level, Teamsters are midway in intelligence between laborers and barbers. The ratings for Teamsters, therefore, were taken as representative of that occupational level. Similarly, locomotive firemen were taken as representative of the next higher level, telegraphers as representative of the next higher level, accountants of the next higher level, and engineering officers of the highest level. Mr. Carl R. Brown utilized Pearson's method of comparing distributions in order to determine the probability that the observed differences between them are due to the operation of different types of selection, or significantly different degrees of the same type of selection. He reports as follows. Using letter-grade frequencies, the quantity, x2, was calculated for pairs of distribution as follows. A table is displayed on the page, labeled Comparison. Engineers versus accountants, 242.97. Accountants versus telegraphers, 100.7. Telegraphers versus locomotive firemen, 100.17. Locomotive firemen versus Teamsters, 124.44. The values of x2 are too large to allow the use of Elderton's tables. By means of the original formula, the value of P for that first comparison, engineers versus accountants, was found to be minus 47, P equals 25.10. Since the probability that the difference between these two distributions of letter grades is a result of chance is so small, we may conclude, using the converse statement, that the two populations represented by our samples are clearly differentiated as regards Army intelligence ratings. Although the x2 values obtained from the other comparisons are only about half that of engineers versus accountants, they're outside the limits of Elderton's tables, as indicates such an infinitesimal probability that chance is the sole factor, that all the other groups under consideration may be regarded as distinct from the point of view of Army intelligence ratings. The significance of Group 1 is brought out not only by its subdivision to 4 or 5 occupational levels, but also by the fact that similar occupations are bunched on the intelligence scale. That is, similar occupations have similar distributions of intelligence with the medians approximately the same. For example, general auto repairmen, auto engine mechanics, and auto assemblers are all in the upper part of the C group of occupations. Then the upper part of the C+ groups we have railroad clerks, filing clerks, and general clerks, bunched together with practically the same median scores. It is also interesting to note that telephone operators fall in the uppermost part of the C group, while telegraphers are well in the middle of the C+ group. Bookkeepers bear the same relation to accountants, with the exception that each is in a higher letter grade. In view of the possibility that the table of occupational intelligence standards is unreliable, in part because of inaccuracies of the personal methods, data were requested for soldiers who had been occupationally classified by trade tests. Sufficient returns were obtained on 8 occupations to warrant the construction of Table 379, which gives a percentage distribution of intelligence ratings of men not trade-tested. Data previously secured and reported in Table 378, and men who passed the trade test, i.e. qualified apprentices or better in that trade. Table 379 is displayed on the page. It will be noted that in every case except that of truck drivers, the percent of beta men qualifying on the basis of trade tests is much lower than the basis of personal interview. Inspection of the table also indicates that in every case, the distribution of cases for those passing the trade test is skewed toward the A and B end of the scale. For those not trade tested, we have a relatively large number of cases located toward the D and D- end of the scale. Significance of the differences of these intelligence distributions was determined by Mr. Brown with Pearson's method used above. The results are as follows. A table is displayed on the page. By reference to Table 379, we see that only a small number of cases of plumbers, general blacksmiths, and cooks have been trade tested. It is largely for this reason that the differences turn out to be insignificant. This lack of significance means that it is necessary to obtain more cases in order to show any real difference that may exist. The results in the other 5 occupations indicate that there are real differences in the direction of superiority and intelligence of those qualifying in a trade on the basis of trade tests as compared with those qualifying on the basis of personal interview. The facts seem to indicate that intelligence is a factor in the successful passing of the trade tests, and that this, in turn, even in such a trade as 23-ton heavy truck driver, where a performance trade test is in use. An analysis of the relation between degrees of skill in an occupation, as measured by trade tests, and intelligence ratings is possible on the basis of Table 380, which gives a percentage distribution of intelligence ratings of apprentices, journeymen, and experts as classified by trade tests. Only 4 occupations had a sufficient number of cases in each group to warrant presentation. Table 330 is displayed on the page. The significance of the differences of these distributions was also worked out in the same manner as above, and the results were as follows. A table is displayed on the page. In the case of both 24G and 6G, we have significant differences in 2 of the 3 comparisons. In the case of 27H, we have a significant difference between apprentices and journeymen. In the case of 23T, we find that none of the differences between any of the pairs of degrees of skill are significant. It would seem that the function of intelligence plays a varying part in its relation to degrees of skill as classified by trade tests. For example, in the case of 24G, we seem to find a difference only between the apprenticeship level and the higher levels of skill. In the case of 6G, we find the difference only between the expert level and the 2 lower levels. In the case of 23T, we find no significant differences between levels of skill, although intelligence is demonstrably effective in qualifying the apprenticeship level of that trade. To secure a single measure representative of the degree of relationship between intelligence ratings and degree of expertness as measured by trade tests, Pearson's coefficient of mean square contingency was utilized. The results were as follows. A table is displayed on the page. The above coefficients indicate that there is a slight degree of relationship existing between intelligence and degree of expertness measured by trade tests, particularly oral trade tests. The trade test for heavy truck drivers is a performance test, and one would hardly expect intelligence, as measured by Army intelligence tests, to show any relationship to a non-language performance test. It is not surprising, therefore, to find the coefficient to be only 0.13. However, to qualify in the trade does involve the intelligence factor. This is shown by the fact that those passing the trade test for truck drivers are significantly more intelligent than those who claimed tradeability and were so classified by personal interview. Not enough data were available to determine in any satisfactory way the interrelations of intelligence, skill, and expertness in varying trades. That the relative importance of these factors should vary from trade to trade is probably to be expected and is probably dependent upon a wide variety of causes involving the nature of the specific trade and the types of people who gravitate into that trade. Enough evidence is presented concerning the influence of intelligence upon the results of trade tests to warrant the use of intelligence tests in conjunction with trade tests. Such use would be based on the principle that, assuming equal ability of 2 or more persons as measured by a trade test, the more intelligent should be selected for placement. A further comparison between the results of the studies made at Camp Wadsworth, Camp Devens, and the Surgeon General's office brings out in detail the fact that the relative ranking of various occupations by the Alpha examination is very similar to the studies mentioned. Tables 381, 382, and 383 give the several comparisons. To summarize the results of these comparisons, we have the following correlation values. Wadsworth study versus Devens study, positive 0.90. Devens study versus Surgeon General study, positive 0.88. Wadsworth study versus Surgeon General study, positive 0.98. Tables 381 to 383 are displayed on the following page. The striking similarity in ranking of the occupations common to these studies speaks for the general reliability of the results for those occupations. Specifically, it indicates that any selective factors that may have been operative in determining the nature of Army occupational groups were generally operative. That is to say, in the various camps, the same general conditions prevail. From the practical point of view of the Army, our belief is strengthened that the table of occupational intelligence standards can be used in the Army with resulting increased efficiency in the placement of men. It is in point to mention briefly in this chapter 2 studies made in Washington by the section of psychology during the winter of 1918-19. 106 employees of the Civil Service Commission who had been selected with unusual care and retrained for several months, and in many cases for several years, were given group examination alpha. Since unsatisfactory employees would not have been retained, it is to be presumed that the group is a competent group. The civil service ratings, assigned in percentages on the basis of examination at the time of entry into the civil service, range from 70 to 94. The median alpha score for this group is 150 with extremes of 199 and 70. For the entire group of correlation of alpha score with civil service rating, it is positive 0.48. For a group of 73 who are classified as clerks, the correlation is positive 0.53. In a group of 106 gravitype operatives of the Treasury Department, the median alpha score is 75 with extremes of 11 and 174. The median of the average daily output of plates by this group is 245 with a median error of 2.9%. The highest individual average is 391 plates per day, the lowest 113. The correlation between output and accuracy is positive 0.113, between alpha and accuracy positive 0.019, and between alpha and output minus 0.087. The returns are for special interests is that they exhibit such low correlation between intelligence and accuracy and speed in mechanical work. End of section 39. Section 40 of Psychological Examining in the United States Army by Robert Mearns Yerkes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, recorded by Harvey. Chapter 16. Relation of Ratings to Arm of the Service. In the chapter on the results of Examination A, Part 2, pages 494 ff, comparisons of the intelligence of the enlisted personnel in various organizations and various branches of the service have already been made. Owing to the fact that at the earlier time referred to, no intelligence test had been developed for the foreign-born and illiterate soldier, and owing further to differences among the four camps in regard to the basis of segregation, the comparative results there found were not regarded as altogether reliable. Comparisons of the ratings received in Examination A by officers in different branches of the service have also been made. This chapter is an attempt to furnish more reliable information. The matter is thought to be of significance, since at some camps organizations with similar functions were balanced with regard to psychological grades, and in others allowances were made in assignments on the basis of psychological grades after occupational needs had been met. It is thought that such assignments could best be based upon results already found true in the case of well-established organizations. After the work with Examination A in the first four camps, for the most part newly drafted men, and not established organizations were examined. In only a few cases were divisional organizations examined. The lack of uniformity with regard to the basis of segregation of illiterates persisted, however. It was nevertheless considered worthwhile to make a second computation at the latter time, since the addition of the beta examination had made possible the determination of letter grades for entire organizations. The basis of the present discussion is a principal sample of enlisted men, Group 8, and the principal sample of officers, Group 6. For details as to the method of selection of these groups, see Chapter 1, Part 3. It is worth noting, however, that the record cards of Group 8 were drawn, insofar as possible, from a small number of camps with as many different branches of the service as possible represented in each camp. Thus it was hoped that differences of segregation might neither obliterate nor unjustifiably increase real differences between organizations. It is worth noting that 56% of Group 8 were drawn from four camps: Cody, Lee, Sheridan, Kearney, so that 80% of the group was drawn from these 4 and 4 other camps: Travis, Sevier, Bowie, and Lewis. Camps known to have received especially good or especially poor men were chosen in as nearly as possible equal numbers in order that the combined figures should represent as nearly as might be the typical situation. The fact that the new figures to the striking degree confirm the earlier findings still further convinces us that the comparisons now to be made are reliable for practical purposes. Tables 384 to 390 show the detailed results for enlisted men. Table 391 is derived by considering and combining the alpha grades of men who took alpha grade only, the beta grades of men who took beta only, the alpha beta only, and the grades received in each of the 3 individual examinations. For the sake of comparison, certain other percentages are given in the table. Thus the Negro Draft, Group 4, a Negro Infantry Regiment, and the White Officers, Group 6, are also represented. In the case of the infantry, the general percentages are computed by combining infantry supply, infantry rifle, infantry machine gun, and infantry headquarters company percentages prorated by companies, i.e. giving weights of 1, 12, 1, and 1 respectively. In the case of artillery, the general percentages are similarly obtained by giving prorated weights of 1, 8, 1, 1 respectively to the percentages obtained by artillery supply company, artillery battery, trench mortar battery, and artillery headquarters company. In the case of the sanitary train, the general percentages is obtained by giving the weight of 8 to the percentage of the ambulance company and 5 to the percentage of the field hospital company, since the ratio of strength in these organizations is approximately 8 to 5. A bird's eye view of the results of this study may be obtained by reference to Figure 58. Table 384 is displayed on the page. Figure 58 is displayed on the following page. Tables 385 to 391 are displayed on the following pages. Especially interesting are the increasing percentages of A and B grades inside regimental organizations of infantry and artillery as one passes from supply company through ordinary letter company or battery, machine gun company or trench mortar battery, through headquarters company. In the medical department, also similar expected increases appear as one passes from medical detachment through ambulance company and field hospital to the base hospital. The lower percentages of A and B grades in the overseas base hospital is unexpected. It may well be due partially to the fact that there were relatively poorer groups of men to pick from in the camps, where the majority of the overseas base hospitals which were selected were made up. It may also be partially due to the factors governing the selection of men from overseas at those camps. In the previous study of branches of the service, made on the basis of the examining in the 4 original camps, Part 2, Low, Citation, a comparison was made of 6 branches: infantry, machine gun, artillery, engineer, sanitary train, field signal battalion, on the basis of median scores and a percentage of A and B grades. The percentage study shows an increase over the former figures in the percentages of A and B grades in these branches of from 2.9% in the engineers to 8% in the case of the machine gun battalions. The field signal battalions, however, show a decrease of 3%. The general tendency toward an increase may perhaps be due to a lower norm in alpha than in examination A. The exceptional increase in the case of the machine gun battalion may be due to the fact that, in later times, it was recognized that a considerably higher quality of man was needed for this special duty. It is noteworthy that the present comparison gives the same rank order among these 6 branches as was found in the previous study, except for the single inversion of infantry and machine gun battalion, where the 8% increase of the latter is responsible. The only other striking difference that now occurs is the increase by 10.1% over the older findings with regard to percentage of A and B grades in the supply train. We have no information which would tend to explain this difference. A large part of the diversions trained in the spring of 1918 at Camp Sheridan and Cody were examined after assignment from the Depot Brigade. At Camp Kearney, at a later time, men were assigned to organizations on the basis of a table of psychological needs. This table is based upon a combination of the percentages of the various psychological grades obtained by the 10 best, 10 average, and 10 poorest men as selected in numerous organizations by their commanding officers. The rank order of the 6 branches is precisely the same in our present results as in the table of psychological needs at Camp Kearney. The actual percentages of A and B grades are somewhat higher at Camp Kearney. At Camp Sheridan, the percentage of A and B men in the sanitary train was comparatively quite low, while at Cody the percentage of A and B men in machine gun battalions was comparatively very high. Otherwise, there was close agreement, and the order of the branches was very similar to the one at which we have here arrived. The intelligence ratings of officers of different branches of the service at the 4 original camps were discussed in Part 2, pages 494 ff. Significant differences in median scores and in percentages of A and B grades were found to exist between different branches of the service. The combined rank order from highest to lowest obtained through this treatment of results from all 4 camps combined was Engineers, Field Artillery, Infantry, Quartermaster Corps, Medical Corps, Dental Corps, Veterinary Corps. The principal Hollerist sample for officers by branch of service is exhibited in Tables 392 to 396. Table 397 was derived therefrom to show again the percentages of the different grades in various branches. Figure 59 presents the chief results of Table 397 in graphic form. Calculation on the basis of the percentage of A and B grades gives exactly the same rank order in the 7 branches mentioned. The percentages of A and B grades were approximately 7 to 8% less with Examination A than with Alpha. This is probably due chiefly to the more rigorous and exacting norms used in the former examination. The additional branches of the service now considered are also of interest where any considerable number of cases is given. Figure 59 is displayed on the following page. Tables 392 to 397 displayed on the following pages. There is considerable variation among the different branches. The proportion of A's varies from 22% in the Veterinary Corps to 83% in the Engineers. The proportion of A's and B's combined from 61% in the Veterinary Corps to 97% in the Engineers, and the proportion of grades less than B from 0.3% in the Engineers to 39.1% in the Veterinary Corps. In the Engineers, Artillery, Sanitary Corps, Field Signal Battalions, Machine Gun Battalions, and Infantry, the proportion of A grades is above 50%, and the proportion of A and B grades combined is above 80%. The Engineers rate remarkably high, and the Artillery officers do nearly as well. On the other hand, the ratings in the medical department, especially among the dental and veterinary officers, are strikingly low. It should be concluded from these data that, because of the varying proportions of high grades found in the different arms of the service, the Army was poorly organized. Indeed, it might be that these very differences show organization on a high plane of efficiency, for it seems likely that the work to be done in some branches of the service requires a higher type of intellectual ability than is needed in the others. In connection with Table 397 and Figure 59, a reservation should be made with regard to the medical department at least. It is there made evident that in the Medical Corps, unlike other branches, higher officers stand significantly high, while captains and first lieutenants stand relatively low. It is the great number of captains and first lieutenants in the Medical Corps, therefore, that brings the Corps so far down in rank order, and it is not the medical officers of the higher grades which do so. The latter indeed secure grades slightly better than those secured by officers of equal rank in the other branches combined. See Chapter 17, Figure 62. Table 398, showing the percentage distribution of psychological grades by rank in the Engineers, Field Artillery, Infantry, and Medical Corps, also demonstrates that officers of the rank of Major and above in the Medical Corps secure a greater percentage of A and B grades than do officers in the other corps mentioned, excepting the Engineers. Table 398 is displayed on the page. End of Section 40. Section 41 of Psychological Examining in the United States Army by Mearns Yerkes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, recorded by Leon Harvey. Chapter 17. Relation of Rank to Intelligence. The degree of the dependence of rank upon intelligence rating may be taken to indicate approximately the extent to which intelligence is operative in selection for promotion. A complete comparison of ranks requires that both the commissioned and the non-commissioned grades, in relation to enlisted men, be taken into account. In this study, officers and enlisted men were grouped according to their rank, one rank to a group, except that the group of surgeons included surgeons, surgeons first class, and surgeons majors, and that among the officers a single group was made for above major. The term recruit is used for a new man, not so far along in his training as a private, but still far enough along to have undergone some selection beyond the draft and the depot brigade. Tables 399 to 405 present the figures concerning enlisted men obtained from the principal sampling for Hollerith analysis. Data presenting records for the officers will be found in tables 392 to 397 in the previous chapter. Tables 399 to Table 405 are displayed on the following pages. Of considerable importance is the question as to how many selective factors besides rank enter into the figures here presented. It is not likely that peculiarities of particular camps at which the men were examined brought about any great degree of selection, as for instance, in the case of the enlisted men, the intelligence records were selected so as to include a proportional number of men of each rank from each camp. It has already been shown in chapter that the camp has little to do with the standing of the officers, except in the cases where all the officers from a camp are in the same arm. Age probably does not cause much selection among enlisted men, because correlational studies show that there is very little chance in the scores made by the men between the ages of 20 to 30. In the case of officers, some of the figures may be influenced by the fact that the medical department has a great many older men, but as these are later separated for other reasons, the selection does not operate in the final figures. The distribution of intelligence ratings by rank is shown in Table 406. For the officers, the ratings are based on the score made in alpha, but since these men do not all take the same examination, the grades assigned to them are those made on alpha, beta, or individual examinations, according to the following plan. Table 406 is displayed on the page. It is at once clear that there is a high positive correlation between the rank and the intelligence rating of the enlisted men, and that the officers as a group rate much higher than the enlisted men. The relationship among the officers of the various ranks is not so clear. Figure 60 is displayed on the page, and Figure 62 is displayed on the following page. The table shows that the majors rate a little higher than the officers of any other rank, although the officers of the rank of lieutenant colonel or higher are not very far below the majors. Next in order come the second lieutenants, then the first lieutenants, and finally the captains. The second lieutenants, majors, and higher officers stand above the average of the combined group, the first lieutenants and captains below it. The irregularity in the ratings of the officers is due, it appears, to the inclusion of the medical officers with the others. Officers of the medical department grade lower than the officers of any other branch of the service, viz. Infra. There are no second lieutenants in either the medical corps or the dental corps, and this fact caused the percentage of higher grades to be greater among the second lieutenants and less among the first lieutenants than would otherwise have been the case. Of the first lieutenants the captains used in this study, more than one-third are from the medical department. These two ranks rate low. In view of the facts, Table 407 has been prepared in which ratings of medical officers are omitted. Figure 60 presents the facts shown in Table 407, together with the data concerning the enlisted men. Figure 61 and Table 408 present the same data for the officers of the medical department. Tables 407 and 408 are displayed on the page. The mean alpha scores for the various ranks, exclusive of the medical officers, together with the probable errors, are shown in Table 409, while in Table 410 are presented the ratios of the differences between means to the probable errors of the differences. These ratios indicate that the differences are mathematically significant. The chances of the difference being reversed varies from 75% to 0.1%. In 3 cases out of 10 is less than 33%. The absolute size of the difference, maximal 5.4 points, however, is not of psychological significance. There is no assurance that a significant difference of 5 points or less on the scale of alpha represents a psychological fact and not an artifact. Thus it appears that there are at most only slight differences according to rank among the officers outside the medical department. The captains fall a little below the first and second lieutenants, but the differences are hardly significant. On the whole, it seems safe to say that among the officers outside the medical department, intelligence differences according to rank were, at the time and under conditions of the testing, of no psychological significance. The percentages of A and B grades from Table 407 support this conclusion. Among the officers of the medical department, this situation is quite different. Table 408 and Figure 61 show a considerable agreement between rank and intelligence rating. A noticeable fact, when one considers, for example, the percentage of A and B grades, is that there is little difference between the first lieutenants and the captains, but there is a relatively great difference between the captains and the majors. Apparently, the low rating of the medical officers is due to the fact that the captains and first lieutenants who score low keep the average of the entire medical department down. The higher-ranking officers make slightly better records than the higher officers of the other branches of the service combined. The majors or higher officers in the medical corps rate higher than officers of like rank in the infantry and artillery, and are surpassed only by the engineers. Table 409 and Table 411 are displayed on the page. The high standing of the medical officers above the rank of captain is probably explained by the fact that in the medical department the officers are called upon to perform duties very closely resembling their work in civil life, and a man can be ranked when he enters the service according to his professional standing and placed at once in a position for which he is approximately fitted. In the other branches of the service, the most of the men are called upon to do many things much outside their training and experience, so that regardless of their intellectual ability, they have to spend considerable time in learning their military duties. Thus, rank must be, of necessity, depend to a large extent on the length of time they have actually been in the army. Moreover, the medical department is the only one in which men were commissioned in great numbers, direct from the civil life, without tryout at an officers' training camp. This procedure presumably accounts for the low standing of the junior officers in the medical department, as well as for the fact that the senior officers are better placed according to ability. It is probable that such branches of the service as ordnance or chemical warfare would show the same state of affairs where the data were at hand. Table 413 shows for enlisted men the relationship of intelligence rating and rank to the type of examination taken, whether alpha or beta. The significant thing is that as the rank increases, the percentage of men who take beta decreases. At the same time, there is an increase in the percentage of men getting the higher grades. Table 413 is displayed on the page. End of section 41. Section 42 of Psychological Examining in the United States Army by Mearns Yerkes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Harvey. Chapter 18. Officers Training Camps and Non-Commissioned Officers Schools. Systematic psychological examination of the officers' training schools began with the camps of the third series. Few camps had psychological staffs at this time, so examiners were sent out, each examiner to test the men in several camps. In this way, approximately 1,500 men were tested in 22 different schools. Examination A was used in this testing exclusively. Table 414 shows the distribution of letter grades in the individual camps, and Table 415 presents the same facts on a percentage basis, together with median scores. Figure 63 expresses diagrammatically facts shown in Table 415 with the camps arranged in order of the number of A and B grades obtained. There is a wide range of variation both in the median scores and the percentage of A and B grades. There are 4 times as many A grades made in Devons as in Bowie or in Oglethorpe. If the camps are divided into 2 groups, the grade D is 3 times as frequent in the lower as in the upper half. In the main, the southern camps rank much lower than those in the north. Camp Wordsworth is the only exception to this rule. Tables 414 and 415 are displayed on the page. Figure 63 is displayed on the following page. The following figures make possible comparison of the intelligence rating of students in the officers' training group with enlisted men and with officers. A table is displayed on the page. According to these figures, the average intelligence of the students in the third series of officers' training schools is considerably lower than that for officers in the 4 National Army divisions, which had been examined at the time when these figures were obtained. According to the figures in Table 415, the median score for the officers in the National Army divisions is exceeded by the median score of only 3 out of the 22 officers' training school groups. namely those at Devons, Wadsworth and Grant. This seems to indicate that the student officers in the third series of training schools are inferior to the first and second training schools in intelligence. However, since the men in the training schools were not all given commissions, it may be possible that the intelligence of the group which is successful will be as high as that of the groups already commissioned. The results obtained in the examination of the fourth series of officers' training camps are set forth in tables 416 and 417 in Figure 64. In examining these camps, examination alpha was used and the results were expressed in weighted scores. These examinations were also given after the adoption of the C+ and C- grades. The range of differences between camps is even greater in the fourth series than the third. In Camp Lewis, nearly twice as many men made grades A and B as in Wheeler, and the number of A's made at Lewis is 3 times as great as the number made at Wheeler. There is still possible the tendency of the southern camps to stand low on the list. Table 416 to 417 are displayed on the page. Figure 64 is displayed on the following page. Table 418 shows the comparative rank order of those schools of which records appear in both series. There is some tendency for camps to remain at the same level. 4 camps remain in the same quartile, and 2 of these are in exactly the same position in both series. 6 camps move 1 quartile only, and only 2 camps move as much as 2 quartiles. The last 4 camps in the list, which are located in the south, seem to form a homogeneous group among themselves. Table 418 is displayed on the page. After the fourth series of officers' training schools, a consolidation of the work took place. 4 central officers' training schools for infantry were established at camps Lee, Pike, MacArthur and Grant. There were also other schools for training officers in other branches of the service. Classes were started in these schools every month, and in most of the camps, psychological examinations were given to each class soon after its entrance to the school. Examination alpha was used. The data concerning the results of this testing appear in Table 419 and consist of some 2,000 records chosen in the principal sampling from the 4 infantry schools, records of 917 candidates in the machine gun school at Camp Hancock, of 1,099 men in the training school for engineering officers at Camp Humphreys, and 261 men in the chaplain school at Camp Taylor. 2 points should be held in mind in examining these data. In the first place, the psychological ratings were used to a large extent in the selection of candidates for the schools of the 5th series, and few men were admitted to the schools if their ratings fell below C. There were also a great many men who took the examination at the school for the second or even the third time. It is possible that this last fact does not affect greatly the letter grade of the man, but it may make a slight difference in the percentage of A and B grades obtained by the group. Table 419 is displayed on the page. As shown in Table 419, all the candidates do a little better than the officers selected by the principal sampling. The difference, however, is slight and not significant. On the basis of the percentage of A and B grades obtained, the candidates of the 5th series do much better than those of the 3rd and 4th series. This comparison is highly valid, however, because of the selection of candidates on the basis of intelligence rating, as mentioned above. There had also been a revision of the examination which made it easier to obtain ratings of A and B. For discussion of this last point, see Part 2, page 342. Several studies were made concerning the relationship of intelligence rating to success in the officers' training schools. One of the best of these was made at Camp Lee, with data obtained from the class graduating in October 1918. The results of this study are shown in Table 420. Men are classified according to their success in the school. Those who were commissioned immediately upon graduation were put into the first group. In the second group are the men held for 1 month additional training. In the third group are those held for 2 months additional training. The fourth group consists of those who failed at the end of the course, and the fifth group are those dismissed before their course was finished. An examination of the median scores showed that there were differences between the levels of intelligence of these different groups. The difference between the median of 115 in the group of men failing and the median of 131 made by the men commissioned immediately at the end of the course is significant. The relative success of men in the 7 intelligence groups indicates that the A men have 5 times as much chance as the C- men of getting commissions at the end of the course, and nearly 7 times as much chance of getting commissions eventually. The B and C+ men have 6 times as much chance of success as C- men. The D men have practically no chance at all. This relationship between intelligence rating and success is very high when we consider the other qualities besides intelligence which must be considered in deciding whether or not a man is fit to become an officer. Table 420 is displayed on the page. Data concerning the intelligence ratings made in several non-commissioned officers' schools are presented in tables 421 and 422. These schools show a poorer selection than the officers' training schools, as is to be expected, since the men are what might be termed second choice. Here again we find wide differences between the quality of the men in different camps, but in all cases the candidates rate better than the draft. Tables 423 and 424 present data showing the relation of success in 9 commissioned officers' schools to intelligence ratings. At both Greenleaf and Hancock, the men graduating as surgeons score a large percentage of A and B grades than the others, and the corporals do much better than unsuccessful men. Only a small part of C- and D men were given warrants of any sort. Tables 421 to 424 are displayed on the page. End of section 42. Section 43 of Psychological Examining in the United States Army by Mearns Yerkes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Harvey. Chapter 19. Data from colleges and the Students' Army Training Corps. Data resulting from giving the Alpha examination to the Students' Army Training Corps and to the college groups are of interest as bearing upon the approximate intelligence of such groups, and conversely, of the position of these groups on the scale of Alpha scores. They show, further, the results obtained from the revision of procedure for the use of the Students' Army Training Corps. See Part 1, page 200. Accordingly, it seems desirable to present a number of comparisons based on such data as are available. Caution is necessary in the interpretation of the figures in the tables. It is by no means certain that the values given are typical of the groups which they are supposed to represent. The institutions from which the figures were obtained will be seen to be largely the smaller schools and colleges from the West and South. Few data are at hand from the larger universities, and the records suggest that inclusion of figures from a number of large universities of high standing would materially raise the medians and the percentage of the higher ratings. Again, it cannot be stated with any certainty that the groups to which the examinations were given were truly representative of the institutions. There are from Brown University, for instance, records of only 210 men. This group is such a small proportion of the total registration that the chances are very much against its being representative. At some of the institutions, the tests were given only to those who volunteered to take them, a procedure which introduces a factor of selection that we have no means of measuring. Sometimes the records were obtained from only one class. Such a limitation probably gives a selected group. The figures from the University of Illinois showed distinct class differences. A third factor making for variability in the results is the fact that tests were given under widely varying conditions and by many examiners, most of whom were untrained. While the chances of variations from this source are not large, yet the possibility of such variations must be held in mind while examining the figures. Table 425 shows a distribution of Alpha scores in several of the large groups, and Table 426 the median scores, quartiles, and percentages of A and B grades for the groups listed in Table 425. There are wide differences between these groups. The medians vary from 111 for the normal school women to 130 for the college men, and the percentage of A and B grades combined for the same group varies from 57.4 to 75.2. None of the groups make a record as good as that of the Army officers chosen for the principal sampling for holorith analysis, but all groups rate higher than the Army surgeons, who made 50% A and B grades. The men of the Students' Army Training Corps and the Reserve Officers Training Corps seem to offer good material for the selection of officers for the Army. In Table 427, an analysis is made of the records of 5 years of the Students' Army Training Corps, which included more than 100 men. Here again wide differences are apparent. 2 of the groups of the Reserve Officers Training Corps were made up of more than 100 men each. These 2 groups were compared in Table 428. There is a difference of 10 points in the median scores and a difference of 18.5% in the number of A and B grades obtained. The figures for various groups of college men are presented in Table 429. Here the differences are even more striking, for the medians range all the way from 80 to 150, while the percentages of A and B grades run from 17.4 to 95.5. Several colleges present here a better record than that made by the white officers in the principal sampling. The data for the women from various colleges, Table 430, again emphasizes the differences between institutions. The variations are not so great as they were in the case of the college men, but they are large enough to be of significance. None of the normal schools reported records of enough men to make a study of the differences worthwhile, but the fact that there are large differences between normal schools as well as between colleges is shown in Table 431, which gives the results of 4 groups of normal school women. In Table 432, the division is by sex, while the median scores made by the women are in every case a few points lower than the median scores for the men of similar groups. The differences are so small that they may be regarded as insignificant. The same statement may be made regarding the percentage of A and B grades combined. The men tend towards a higher proportion of A grades. As the figures sent in by the University of Illinois were grouped according to the Department of Study, it was possible to investigate intelligence differences between the various departments. These data are set forth in Table 433. As would be expected, the graduate students rate considerably higher than the students in the undergraduate departments, but this is the only difference of importance. The very slight drop for the students of agriculture is probably not significant. Differences between the men in the 4 years of college were also obtained from the Illinois data, and the results of this study are shown in Table 434. There is a slight but definite increase in the percentage of higher grades with a lower stay at college, presumably as a result of the elimination of poorer men by the ordinary college gate process. Table 425 to Table 434 are displayed on the following pages. Chapter 20. Distribution of scores on the tests in examinations Alpha and Beta. The following tables present the distribution of scores on the separate tests of the Alpha and Beta examinations as they were found among officers and among white and Negro recruits. For the Alpha tests, these groups are unselected officers and unselected recruits. For the Beta test, the recruit groups, both white and Negro, include only men who were too illiterate to take the written examination or who had failed in it. These Beta groups can not be fully defined. In fact, the way in which they were selected differed from camp to camp. As norms, therefore, these distributions of scores on Beta tests are suggestive merely, but for making comparisons of the Beta tests with one another, they may properly be used. Tables 435 to 439 are displayed on the following page. End of Section 43, and the End of Psychological Examining in the United States Army by Robert Mearns Yerkes. Recorded for LibriVox.org by Leon Harvey.